Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Cabbage Head Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Was a Part of Protection Squad. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku let out a satisfied hum as he finished writing out the last of his thoughts on the page before shutting his notebook and stuffing it back in his bag. They always insisted that his need to write everything in a physical notebook was archaic, but something about putting pen to paper helped him work his thoughts out in a way no other method of writing could. The sky was a bright blue and there was a slight breeze in the air, the weather signaling the peak of spring in Musutafu. It had been a year since he had left Aldera and started a new chapter of his life with his friends and family by his side. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking him from his thoughts and reminding him that he had promised to meet Rumi downstairs at 1:30. "Rumi, where are you, twerp?" Izuku rolled his eyes and sent back a snarky reply to his older sister before packing up the rest of his things. The sound of children playing below brought a smile to his face as he stood and took one final glance at the skyline. He walked to one corner of the roof and hit a button on his watch, standing back as the tiles began to slide back until there was an opening in the ground. He double-checked his bag to make sure everything was zipped up before taking a few steps back and jumping into the opening, laughing as he slid down to the bottom floor of the building. The secret slide was something he and May had insisted on when they were designing the building, and he took every chance he could to use it to get around quickly. His fast descent only lasted a few moments, but it was always exhilarating to fly down multiple stories in the blink of an eye. He braced himself as the end of the tunnel approached, easily rolling into a squatting position and standing to brush himself off. He exited the hidden room and made his way through the winding hallways of the center, taking a moment to gaze up at the beautiful mural Aunt Nimari created for the grand opening a few months ago. The mural was filled with bright colors and images of people enjoying the company of their loved ones. Some scenes depicted children laughing and playing, while others showed adults embracing each other with wide smiles. There were those that had mutant quirks and those that had no physical manifestations of a quirk at all. Izuku always smiled when he saw the scene of a woman wearing a quirkless pride shirt towards the center of the piece. Higari had insisted on crafting custom metal letters to spell out the name of the center, and Izuku's heart always stammered when he found himself admiring it. Musutafu Center for Quirk Equality. At first Nedzu had insisted on using the Midoriya name, but both Inko and Izuku insisted on making it something more general. Every single person in the family had some role designing and building this place, and it didn't feel right to only put their name up there. Many of the various clubs and groups that met there were coming and going in the hallways, and Izuku waved to those he recognized and smiled warmly at the new faces. He loved seeing people of all ages and abilities gathering here and making new friends. His phone buzzed again, another message from Rumi, and he began to quicken his pace towards the main atrium. He really didn't want to incur his sister's wrath today, especially with their weekly training session only a few days away. His eyes scanned the crowd, easily spotting the familiar ears and bright white hair of the rabbit hero. She was taking a picture with a little girl carrying a Mirko plush, so Izuku decided to stand a few feet away to let them have their moment. After the little girl had wobbled away with her mother, he finally approached, grinning innocently as his big sister glared at him. Look who finally decided to show up. She crossed her arms and tapped one of her feet angrily, but he knew she wasn't really that mad at him. If she was really that upset, she would have tackled him the moment she saw him. "Sorry, I got distracted writing notes for my next lesson with Nedzu." He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and shrugged. Rumi glared at him for a few more moments before her face morphed into a soft smile, though she ruffled his hair before they began walking towards the entrance doors. The siblings chatted as they walked, catching each other up on their days and pushing each other's buttons. A group of younger children ran up to the pair, almost tripping over their feet as they rushed towards Izuku. "Midoriya, come play with us," one of the girls, Kasumi, asked. She held up a soccer ball with sparkling eyes, and the rest of the kids chanted in the background. Izuku would normally say yes, but he and Rumi had promised to meet up with Keigo and Dabi at their new apartment to help them finish unpacking the last of their things. "I'm sorry guys, maybe tomorrow." He smiled apologetically as the children groaned in protest, but they didn't push him too hard. They all knew he would keep his promise, as he always had. He watched as they ran back towards the doors leading to the outdoor play area, smiling widely as he saw all the children outside playing together. Many of them were quirkless, or had quirks labeled as villainous by the rest of society. At the beginning they were the only children that came to the center, but slowly children and adults with all types of quirks began using the center and its resources. Many pro-heroes outside of the family helped them raise funds and gain community support for the center, and even more had joined since they opened. Hero agencies across the country began sending representatives to host workshops or meet and greets, helping to boost the center's reputation and helping them to reach more people. Izuku spent most of his free time here now, whether it was hanging out with his friends or getting to know the various people that came in and out throughout the day. His heart always warmed when he met fellow quirkless people who were able to find community through their work, and he had become a bit of a mentor for the quirkless kids he met there. He and Rumi continued walking, and Izuku was growing more excited to see Keigo and Dabi in their new home. They were just about to exit the building when a girl bumped into Izuku, sending them both tumbling to the ground. She landed halfway on top of him, and a sticky liquid began dripping onto his arm and shoulder. His mind reasoned that she must have had a soda or some other treat in her hands, and now it was spilling on the both of them. He sat up and got ready to apologize for not paying attention, but his words quickly died when his eyes landed on her. His heart raced as he realized that the girl was not covered in soda or anything sweet, she was covered in blood. Himiko always wanted to play with other children, never quite understanding their hesitancy towards her. She tried to learn the rules of interacting with her peers, balancing on the tightrope of expectations that were set by her parents and teachers. The rules had been set ever since her quirk manifested at 5 years old, and her parents' smiles were replaced with sneers. Talking about her quirk was off limits, especially if it pertained to the less savory aspects of her transformation. She was forbidden from consuming blood, no matter how bad her headaches got. Her fangs were to be filed every 2 weeks, and their length was carefully monitored by her mother to ensure they didn't grow back too quickly. These rules had guided Himiko through life, set with the promise of friendships and normalcy. Himiko had held herself back from talking about her fascination with blood for years, fighting through migraines and dizziness all to keep up the mask she had created for herself. She had been good, avoiding temptation and keeping herself out of trouble over the years. Her parents still scolded more than they encouraged her, but she couldn't blame them. Himiko had been born wrong, and she would do anything to lessen the burden she had brought upon her parents. But there was always a small voice in her head tempting her to burn their expectations to the ground, to be everything they had always feared she would be. Every time she had a pen in her hand, she would fight off the urge to stab, to cover everything in the red liquid that filled her daydreams. She never thought she would act out on these intrusive thoughts, content with imagining the feeling of blood-coated hands and skin. There was no room for error in her actions, not when her parents watched her carefully for any signs of abnormality or evil. Then something inside her slipped out of place, or perhaps it was the natural conclusion to years of repressing her urges and needs. There was a park near her house that she enjoyed exploring before her parents got home from work, a way for her to be alone without the cautious gazes of her family watching over her. She had been taking one of these walks when she came across an injured bird on the path. The animal's wings seemed to be broken, causing it to writhe on the ground in pain. Her first instinct was to help the poor creature, maybe wrap it up in her cardigan and take it to the nearest veterinarian. But she couldn't take her eyes off of the bird, her gaze following every twitch and movement the animal made. She sucked in a breath when the scent of blood wafted up to her, her eyes darting to a wound on the bird's side. The sight of blood made her dizzy, and her body seemed to move before she could even stop herself. When her consciousness returned, she was sitting on the front steps of her home, her hands and face covered in blood and tears streaming down her face. The taste of iron in her mouth filled her with horror, and she was grateful that she didn't remember whatever led her here. She sat there on the porch shivering and crying until her parents got home and discovered their daughter on the stoop. She was numb as they reprimanded her, standing silent as her mother clawed at her skin and called her terrible names. Her father stood a few feet away, his face a blank canvas with barely contained rage simmering under the surface. Her mind felt fuzzy, like she wasn't fully settled into reality. White noise rang through her ears, further blocking her mother's voice and causing Himiko to feel restless. A sharp pain suddenly erupted across her face, bringing her back to reality and causing a fresh trail of blood to trickle down her face. She vaguely registered that her mother had slapped her, the woman's gaudy wedding ring leaving a large gash in its wake. "Are you even listening to me?" her mother hissed, raising her hand to strike her daughter again. Her father didn't interrupt the violence, simply watching as his wife struck the girl over and over again. Himiko took each hit, not making a sound during the onslaught of violence. Her father only stepped in when one of their neighbors peeked their head out of the window to see what was going on, his concern for their reputation eclipsing any paternal duty to his child. "Let's take this inside, girls," he said quietly, his voice laced with annoyance as he grabbed his wife's arm and began to guide her inside. Himiko stood, wobbling a bit on her feet as she tried to regain her balance. Her parents were standing in the doorway expectantly, clearly waiting on her to make her way into the house for further punishment. She had always followed her parents' orders without question, hoping to gain their love through obedience. There had always been a clear path to her parents' affection. If she could be normal, she would be accepted and cared for. That path didn't seem as clear to her now. Her eyes slowly drifted up from the ground and towards the street, and it was in that moment that she realized just how close true freedom was. In just a few steps she could be free from her parents' expectations, from the cruel words that were waiting for her if she went back inside that house. Himiko began walking forward, ignoring the calls of her name and her mother's attempts to stop her. Her pace began to pick up, breaking into a full sprint when she felt her father's grasp on her arm. She ran and ran and ran. People stopped to stare at her with concern, clearly unsure about the girl running down the street covered in blood. Tears began to pour freely down her face, and she was sure she looked absolutely insane. Her feet took her on a familiar path, one she had taken on the weekends when she wanted to get out of the house for a few hours. A beautiful multi-story building came into view, a place she had never dared to step foot into. She had passed it so many times, looking longingly at the groups of people mingling together in the various parks on the property. Her legs began to cramp, slowing her run until she began to stumble up the front steps. Her vision blurred, exhaustion finally overtaking her as she pushed open the front door to the center. The last thing she saw before passing out was a head of curly green hair, and she couldn't help but think that she was safe for the first time in her life. The cult of Izuku Midoriya. Tsukachi, the man in the yellow hat. Please keep an eye out for this girl. She ran away from home about an hour ago and her parents are worried. Image attached. Inko Midoriya. I think that young lady just passed out on top of Izuku. But something about this doesn't seem like a typical runaway situation. Izuku Green Gremlin. Do not let her parents anywhere near her. I'm currently compiling evidence of their abuse and neglect while Rumi helps Himiko clean up. Tsukachi, the man in the yellow hat. Got it, kiddo. Send Netsu and I the evidence when you get a chance. I'll distract her parents until we have enough to arrest them. Aizawa Uncle Sleepy. Am I to assume we are adopting another stray? Inko Midoriya. That assumption would be correct, Shota. Himiko's head hurt as her eyes slowly opened, and she briefly wondered when she had gotten on the floor. Her vision blurred as she looked up and saw a face full of freckles and kind green eyes staring down at her. The only thing that kept repeating in her mind was safe, a word she had never truly known the meaning of. As she felt herself lose consciousness again, she muttered something to the stranger holding her in their arms. One last plea of a desperate girl trying to maintain this brief comfort for a moment longer. Please, please don't tell my parents where I am. Izuku's blood was burning in his veins, a sensation that only egged him on as he typed away at his laptop next to where Himiko slept. It felt wrong to refer to the girl by her first name, but he refused to use the name of those bastards. He had to fight down the urge to walk to their house and hurt them in all the ways they had hurt their daughter over the years. He had been scrolling through security footage from around their neighborhood for the past hour, finding a horrific amount of evidence to put them both in jail for a long time. How could anyone treat their child that way? Izuku knew from experience that there were cruel people in the world, but his familiarity with it didn't make it any better for him. Rumi had helped Himiko clean up in her dazed state before the girl collapsed on one of the beds in the guest rooms. Izuku was happy that the rooms were being put to use, but he was still devastated every time someone needed to use their services to get away from abuse and violence. He finished his report and encrypted it before sending it to Tsukachi and Netsu, hoping the two of them could get a case started before the end of the night. Himiko stirred in her sleep, and Izuku watched as her face morphed into a pained grimace as she whimpered. He winced as the nightmare overtook her, debating on whether or not to wake her. Too many people he cared about seemed to be plagued by nightmares, and he wished he could dive into their minds and personally fight away the demons that haunted them in their sleep. Dabi hated to be woken up when he was having a bad dream, but always welcomed quiet company after he woke up. Hitoshi liked to be alone whenever he woke up, always feeling overwhelmed if too many people tried to surround him after a night terror. They liked to keep her hands busy after she woke up, whether it was making a quick snack or tinkering with her latest invention. Izuku liked to be held whenever he woke up crying, as it reminded him of the nights his mom or Dabi would find him on the couch trying to force himself back to sleep. He stayed back, not wanting to accidentally cause more harm than good if he tried to comfort her the wrong way. It was difficult to watch her struggling in her sleep, but Izuku would wait until she could tell him how to best help her. There was a soft knock at the door that broke him out of his thoughts as he watched his mother quietly enter the room. Izuku, why don't you take a break? I'll keep an eye on her. His mother carted her hand through his curls softly before gesturing towards the door. Part of him wanted to argue, but something in his mother's eyes told him that she needed this more than he did. His mother always had a soft spot for children, and she hated seeing them abused or mistreated in any way. It is why she had chosen to fight for people whose voices were oppressed. And it was why she raised Izuku to always reach out a hand to those in need. He gave her a tight hug before shooting one last glance at Himiko, who seemed to still be fighting off the nightmare. As he left the room, he heard the bed creak, and he turned to find his mother softly running her hand up and down Himiko's back. The girl seemed to calm under Inko's touch, and Izuku closed the door behind him with a small smile on his face. He was looking forward to adding another member to their family. Warm, That was the first word that came to Himiko's mind as she slowly began to regain consciousness. There was something fuzzy covering her body, and the scent of lavender surrounded her. It took her a few moments to remember where she was and how she got there, causing her to shoot up in a panic. A hand reached out and touched her shoulder, and for some reason the unfamiliar action calmed her down. "It's okay, sweetheart. You are safe here, I promise." A kind woman with lovely green hair spoke softly as she slowly began to rub up and down Himiko's back. The green hair seemed familiar, but the woman's face was missing the freckles she had seen right before she passed out in the community center's entrance. The woman, who introduced herself as Inko Midoriya, explained to her that they would not allow her parents anywhere near her. She handed Himiko a small toiletry bag which was filled with a toothbrush, toothpaste, and other essentials. The girl was secretly pleased at the pink color, clutching the bag to her chest like it was a precious gift. "Why don't you clean up so we can get you something to eat?" Inko gestured to the private bathroom inside the room before standing up to make the bed. Himiko's stomach growled in interest, and she hurried to the bathroom. She grimaced as she looked in the mirror, her tired eyes gazing back at her as she washed her face with cold water. Her mother would scold her for looking unpresentable, but she couldn't find it in herself to do anything more than brush her fingers half-heartedly through her hair after she brushed her teeth. She came back out into the room to find Inko sitting on the freshly made bed with a soft smile on her face. The woman was holding a brush and had a jar of hair barrettes and clips next to her. "Would you like me to do your hair?" she asked, patting the spot in front of her. Himiko tensed for a moment, but the kind look in the woman's eyes put her at ease. This wasn't like home, where her mother would ridicule her for not having her hair perfectly combed. She remembered the harsh pull of her mother's hands as she painfully arranged her hair into a tight bun growing up. She slowly sat in front of Inko, holding her breath as the comb began to weave its way through her hair. The woman sprayed something that smelled like strawberries on her locks, allowing the comb to glide effortlessly as she pulled her hair up into twin buns. Inko handed her the jar of barrettes, telling her to choose whichever ones she would like. Himiko carefully took out the different accessories, her eyes watering as she realized she had never been given a real choice in her appearance before. She chose a few heart-shaped gems and handed them to Inko, and the woman went back to her styling. When Himiko looked in the mirror, she began to sob, not realizing how much a new hairstyle would mean to her. Her mother had always said childish barrettes and twin buns were beneath her, but it felt like this was how she was meant to look. Inko reached out her hand and Himiko took it without question, following the kind woman out to the halls of the building. She was beginning to like feeling safe, and she hoped she wouldn't have to give it up anytime soon. Sekijiro had just finished changing out of his hero uniform when his phone began buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, hoping it wouldn't be an emergency call from UA or his agency. He was unsurprised to find Ryo's contact flashing on his screen, as his best friend liked to call him throughout the day to check in and share his random thoughts. "Did you make another student cry or something, Ryo?" Sekijiro answered with a smirk as he grabbed his bag from his desk chair. "I don't scare them on purpose," Ryo growled, but his friend quickly regained his calm after a moment. "I am actually calling you about something a little serious, Sekijiro." The serious tone in the counselor's voice put him on edge, and he immediately slipped into a more professional mindset. "What's going on?" he asked, listening as his friend told him about the girl who collapsed at the community center. Ryo told him about the abuse she had gone through, how her quirk had been demonized instead of developed. It was no secret that he had a substantial soft spot for children, and he had to fight back tears as he recalled his own issues growing up. He was thankful that his parents were so supportive and kind, but he knew the grim reality people with blood quirks face. Every instinct in him screamed to go find this girl, to give her a home and a family that would embrace her instead of trying to change her. He had been making fun of Aizawa for years after he had been adopted by the little green-haired boy, but he was now beginning to understand. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he assured, smiling at Ryo's affirmative grunt. He tried to keep his driving under control as his heart beat quickly in his chest. The community center came into view, and Sekijiro pulled into his usual spot towards the center of the parking lot. When Nedzu had first explained the idea behind their movement to the UA staff, all of them immediately jumped on to help in any way they could. Far too many of them had experienced their own issues with bullying and abuse, and they would do anything to prevent more children from experiencing the same. He was proud of his work there, and had helped many parents learn to guide their children with blood-based quirks. There was a part of him that was disappointed by Himiko's fate, but another part of him was grateful that the center was there to be a safe place for children like her. He didn't want to imagine what would have happened if she had no place to go. He read over the text Nedzu had sent him, giving him instructions on how to find the Midoriyas and their new ward. Once he reached the door to the meeting room, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before knocking twice. "Come in," Nedzu's voice rang out, and Sekijiro opened the door to find a room filled with familiar faces. Nedzu and Inko Midoriya sat together at one end, right next to her son and a blonde-haired girl with space buns. Mirko stood guard in the corner, the glare on her face making it apparent that she had heard about the abuse the poor girl had gone through. Aizawa and Mike sat with Hawks and Azure, the latter of whom kept a concerned gaze on Himiko. He knew that the new hero had a rough childhood, and he was sure that these types of situations only brought up unwanted feelings. "Hello, everyone," he waved awkwardly, unsure of his place in front of the tight-knit family. "I'm happy you could make it so quickly. Please, make yourself comfortable." Nedzu gestured towards the empty seats at the table before whipping out his signature pot of tea. Everyone in the room reached for a cup, and Sekijiro watched as Inko poured Himiko her own cup of tea. Something deep inside him stirred as he watched the girl nervously sip at her drink, her eyes darting around the room like a scared animal. While he had always adored children, he had never really considered having any of his own. Looking at girl across the table from him made him reconsider that idea. Inko glared at the two people across the table from her, and her stomach churned as she listened to the deal Nedzu had struck with Himiko's so-called parents. While she knew that her father worked at the commission, she and Nedzu had hoped to get the two charged with child abuse and quirk discrimination. It seemed the man had close ties to the commission president, meaning that it would be difficult to press any charges against the couple. They didn't fight too hard to keep custody of Himiko, more worried about their public appearance than keeping their daughter with them. The idea of a pro-hero adopting the girl seemed to anger them more than anything, and they insisted that their ties to her be erased. Apparently being perceived as absent parents was worse than being abusive in reality, Inko thought to herself. Izuku would be angry, and she would have to find a way to calm him down before he tried to hack the commission database himself. She tried to reason that they achieved something, getting that poor girl out of the clutches of her parents. While it would be satisfying to see them punished, at least they could find comfort in Himiko's safety. The meeting adjourned with Nedzu baring his teeth in a threatening grin, once again reminding the monsters in front of them that they were not allowed anywhere near Himiko or UAS campus. Sukachi was glaring from the corner, clearly unhappy with the results of their negotiations. Nedzu jumped down from his perch on the table and walked over to the detective with his hands clasped behind his back. "Don't worry, detective. We will just need to play the long game with this case." The principal's eyes gleamed, and Inko found herself grinning at the sight. Yes, the Togas and the commission could rest easy tonight, thinking that they won. They would be dealt with later on. "Izu, where are you taking me?" Himiko questioned as the freckled boy led her through the halls of the center. She had gotten settled in at her new home, excited at the prospect of being able to decorate her own space for once. "You'll see," her new friend responded, dragging her by her wrist until they stopped in front of the mural inside the center's lobby. Izuku walked her closer, finally letting go of her hand to gesture up. "Everyone in the family is represented in this mural, if you know where to look." The boy spent a few minutes pointing out the various symbols, like a red feather for Keigo or a teacup for Nedzu. Himiko listened closely, feeling as though she was being invited into something special. Finally, Izuku pointed towards the right side of the mural, where a wet paint sign hung nearby. It took her a few moments to figure out what he was pointing at, but when she did, she choked out a sob. In the upper corner of the mural there was a freshly painted sky in the background, and flying in the air were a pink bird and a red bat. Himiko had tears pouring down her face as she looked up at the image, proof that she had a family that cared about her and her well-being now. The bird was a symbol of a new beginning for her, a way for her to move on from the past and move into this next phase. Izuku wrapped his arm around her as she cried, and she knew that she'd never have to worry about feeling safe again. Izuku sighed as he melted into the pile of blankets on the floor of Keigo and Dabi's new apartment. Rumi and Tensei were on one of the sofas eating popcorn while their hosts finished up a few more snacks. Hitoshi, Mei, and Tenya were piled next to him discussing which movie they would watch. It was peaceful and chaotic and everything Izuku could ever hope for wrapped in one. He couldn't wait for Himiko to join them for the next movie night. Chaotic welcome party. Nedzu rat god. "Hello, everyone. I spoke to Inko and we both agree that Kan should be added to the chat." Nedzu added 40 to the chat. Izuku Green Gremlin changed 40 to Vlad King Dracula SR. Izuku Green Gremlin. "Welcome, D. Vlad King Dracula SR. I have a feeling I might regret this." Sukachi the man in the yellow hat. "It is too late. They have already trapped you." Ms. Joke Ronald McDonald. "Oh, come on, detective. You know you love us." Sukachi the man in the yellow hat. "You're not wrong." Izuku Green Gremlin. "We love you too, Couch Man." Vlad King Dracula SR. "I got Himiko a phone. I am going to add her to this chat as well." Vlad King Dracula SR. Added 40 to the chat. Vlad King Dracula SR. Changed 40 to Himiko Dracula JR. Himiko Dracula JR. "Hi guys, D lesser than 3. Inko Mamadoria. Hello, sweetheart. Aizawa Uncle Sleepy. Hello, Kan and Himiko. Welcome to the family. Mike Uncle Loud. I think we should have a little celebration for our newest members." Inko Mamadoria. "I agree. Is everyone available tomorrow night for a special family dinner?" Mirko Carrot Lover. "I'll be there as soon as I get off patrol, Ma." Dabi, my chemical romance reject. Keigo and I will be there. We can bring over an appetizer or something. Keigo chicken, agreed. Can't wait to see you guys. Midnight and Y Quill, Emmy and I will be there. Power Loader Mole Man, May and I would love to be there. May Pink Gremlin, Dad, can we show them our new inventions? Power Loader Mole Man, I'll run it by Inko, Little Tinkerer. Tensei Zoom Zoom, Tenya and I will be there. We'll bring over some desserts. Izuku Green Gremlin, I'll ask Mr. Kobayashi and Grandma Hazuki. Snipe Yeehaw, I will be there as well. Best Genus Denim for Lif, shocking. Mike Uncle Loud, Snipe Yeehaw, Best Genus Denim for Lif, don't worry about it. I will be there. Hitoshi Purple Gremlin, Izu, we should show them that new move we've been working on and training. Tenya Zoom Zoom JR, I am not sure that is a good idea. Izuku sank further into the couch in the teacher's lounge as he turned the page of his book. Nedzu was currently in a meeting with a student and their parents, giving Izuku an hour or two of free time. He initially planned on heading to the support labs to work on a few projects, but that was before Aunt Nem shoved an art history book into his hands on her way back to her classes. The book gave an overview of symbolism in art, specifically those used to protest inequality. He was engrossed in the stories of artists risking it all to make a statement against their governments and the societies around them, and he was already thinking of ways to use art for their own movement. While they had made a lot of progress, the sad truth was the community center and their outreach programs could only do so much. Quirkless people and those with undesirable quirks were still being abused, bullied, and oppressed every single day. He was determined to save as many people as he could, even if the world fought him every step of the way. The door to the room opened, but he was too focused on reading to really pay it any mind. It was probably one of the teachers coming to grab their lunch or something they needed for classes. He was close to finishing the page he was reading when he sensed a presence next to him. "Hello," a booming voice called out, causing Izuku to throw the book in the air and throw out an instinctive punch. Luckily, he was able to slow his fist a bit once he realized what he was doing, but he still ended up punching the stranger in the face. "I am so sorry," Izuku yelled out, immediately bending down to check on the stranger. It was another boy around his age, or at least he thought so. The kid was a giant, easily the height of some pro heroes Izuku had met over the years. That was such a passionate punch. The teen smiled, which convinced Izuku that he definitely gave the guy a head injury. The door to the room opened again, revealing ectoplasm with 2 bottles of water in his hands. "Inasa." The hero looked around the room in confusion until his eyes landed on the 2 boys on the floor. Izuku smiled guiltily and waved, hoping that the teacher wouldn't judge him too hard for punching a random kid in the face. "I see you've already met Izuku," Ectoplasm commented flatly, placing the waters down before walking over to the 2 teens. The next few minutes were spent checking the boy, Inasa Yurashi, for a concussion. Once they were certain that he was okay, they made their way to the seating area in the room. Ectoplasm explained that Yurashi was his personal student, and that he was giving the boy a tour of UA so that he could see what being a hero student is like. Izuku once again apologized for punching him, but Yurashi brushed it off with a warm smile. "It is all right. I know I can be loud at inappropriate times." A tinge of sadness crossed his eyes, and Izuku wondered who told him that. He knew from personal experience that it was easy to internalize the things people told you about yourself, whether they were true or not. "It's no problem. That just means you're passionate, right?" Izuku had noticed that Yurashi used the word a lot, and was satisfied when his statement made the boy's eyes widen in surprise. Yes," Yurashi replied with a shy smile. Ectoplasm looked on with a pleased sparkle in his eye, happy to see his student making a friend. The boys began discussing their dreams of becoming heroes, both of them delighted to talk about various pros and the heroes that inspired them. Yurashi explained that he had always looked up to Endeavor as a child, but that admiration had been soured after the hero had brushed him off as a child. Izuku had his own reasons for disliking the number 2 hero, but he simply nodded in agreement instead of elaborating. After a while, it was time for Yurashi's tour to continue, and Ectoplasm invited Izuku to accompany them. He had been to every corner of this campus at least 100 times, but he'd never pass up the opportunity to watch someone experience it for the first time. Yurashi's eyes sparkled as they made their way around the main building. The shining halls of UA standing and all their glorious students worked diligently in their classes. The trio explored a few of the mock cities around campus, both boys dreaming of one day taking the UA entrance exam in one of the facilities. They then headed to the support classrooms, barely avoiding an explosion that came from one of the first-year labs. Their final destination was the training rooms, gyms of various sizes meant to help hero students mold their bodies and their quirks. Izuku's hands began to flex, itching for a fight now that they were here. Yurashi's quirk was interesting to him, and he would love to test his skills against a powerful quirk like that. He'd also like to fill a page in one of his journals, if his new friend was willing to answer his questions. Yurashi seemed to be eyeing the mat as well, a similar yearning in his eyes that made Izuku grin. "Want to spar?" His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it as well. Urashi turned to ectoplasm for permission, and the pro simply nodded his approval. You might regret this. The teacher patted his student on the back before walking to the other side of the room. Urashi looked confused yet confident, clearly unintimidated by the green-haired boy even after being punched in the face. They had explained that Izuku was Netsu's personal student, but had failed to mention the years he had spent training under various pro heroes. This will be fun, Izuku thought to himself as he began to stretch, already planning on how to take down the larger team. Once they were both warmed up, they got into position, eyeing each other like predators ready to pounce on their prey. It was clear that Urashi had training, based on the way he held himself. Ectoplasm went over a few ground rules, essentially telling them not to injure each other too badly. He stepped back, waiting a few moments before signaling them to begin. Urashi activated his quirk in a blink of an eye, barreling towards Izuku like a tornado. Izuku was distracted for a moment, taking in the pure power of the quirk before shifting back into game mode. He dodged the attack by rolling underneath Urashi's feet, using his momentum to do a handspring back onto his feet. His opponent stopped himself and whipped back around, going low to sweep Izuku's feet. They fought back and forth for a while, Urashi's training making him a fun opponent for Izuku. Still, the team made a few sloppy mistakes that eventually landed him on the ground beneath Izuku's knee. A feeling of victory rushed over him as adrenaline pumped through his veins, and the smile on Urashi's face made it clear that the boy wasn't upset from his loss. You are such a passionate fighter. You must have some type of intelligence-enhancing quirk. Urashi's eyes sparkled with curiosity as a familiar sour feeling filled Izuku's gut. He'd hate to lose a friend so quickly, but he wasn't ashamed of his quirk status. Memories of Tenya's initial disdain for Izuku's quirklessness flashed through his mind, and he was more than willing to repeat the tradition of beating acceptance into someone new. He took a deep breath before finally replying, I'm actually quirkless. Izuku watched, waiting to see how this would go. Urashi didn't seem surprised or confused, simply nodding once before asking Izuku to teach him a few of the moves he had used. He answered a few questions about his training and promised to show him the various flips he had used. But a question still ate away in the back of his mind. Do you think quirkless people can be heroes? He blurted it out a bit abruptly, but he needed to know. Acceptance was sometimes more complex, and just because someone had no issue with his quirk status did not mean that they would support his dreams. The question seemed to confuse Urashi, as the boy stared at Izuku for a few moments with a blank expression before nodding his head up and down. Of course, why wouldn't they? He said it like it was a universal truth. Before Izuku could speak, his friend continued, I am not unaware of the pain you must have endured, and I am sure that you have been told your dreams are impossible. Urashi stood tall, his chest puffed out as he spoke. Yet you kept pushing on in the face of great adversity. That makes you the most passionate future hero ever. Izuku's eyes stung with tears as he processed what Urashi had said, and he quickly leapt forward and gave his friend a tight hug. Thank you, he exclaimed, grateful to find yet another person that believed he could achieve his goals. Urashi returned the hug and patted him on the back while Ectoplasm watched the exchange with a soft expression. They cleaned up the training room and headed back to the teacher's lounge, ready to finish their day up. Izuku had no notifications from Netsu, so he was content with getting to know Urashi a bit more. He was excited to find Vlad and Himiko sitting at one of the desks, a stack of paperwork in front of them. He immediately ran over to give her a hug, a gesture she readily accepted and reciprocated. Ectoplasm, it's good to see you. Vlad greeted the other pro before turning towards the new face. Ectoplasm introduced Urashi, who seemed to be starstruck by the teacher in front of him. This is my daughter, Himiko. Vlad pointed towards the blonde girl with a small smile, watching as she squeezed Izuku tightly. No one in the room missed the content smile on her face when the pro referred to her as his child. The three teens talked for a bit, with Himiko explaining that she was here to fill out her paperwork to officially enroll at UA. Izuku was grateful they had found her when they did, as her health and control of her quirk had deteriorated to a dangerous degree. The blood quirk specialist they had found was surprised that she had not committed an act of violence against another person, as her cravings for blood were some of the most intense she had ever seen. They kept this all documented, making sure to take careful notes and recordings to save for later. Izuku couldn't wait for the day where they could take down her parents. Her doctors had recommended keeping her out of school for a few weeks to ensure that she was getting the nutrients and therapy that she needed. Hound Dog and the rest of the team working with her had signed off earlier in the week, allowing her to finally return to school. Izuku couldn't wait to see what she would accomplish now that she wasn't under her parents' thumbs. Himiko told them about her day, smiling as she talked about shadowing the hero students and watching their training exercises. Izuku recognized the sparkle in her eye, and he couldn't help but wonder if she would enter the hero course eventually. Netsu had her enrolled in general studies for the beginning of her time at UA, giving her the option to enter the support or business courses through tests. and interviews. If she chose to become a hero, she would need to take the entrance exam, or she could use the sports festival to enter the course. She had shown interest in training, and Uncle Sho was always excited to have another person to train with knives. Izuku thought Aunt Nimiri and Aunt Emmy would be great mentors for her as well, as both women had quirks that weren't physical in nature and could help Himiko with strategy. His phone buzzed in his pocket with a text from Nenzu, and he said his goodbyes. Before he left the lounge, he made sure to get Yurashi's phone number, and his heart clenched when he saw the surprised look on the boy's face. Something told him that they would get along well. Dabi paced around the living room of their apartment, fidgeting with his hands as he waited for confirmation that their guests had arrived. He had been anxious ever since he and Keigo had gotten the call from the Hero Commission, and his nerves had not settled no matter how much he tried to calm himself down. "Babe, come take a seat and try to relax a bit." Keigo patted the space next to him on the couch, oblivious to the true panic filling his boyfriend's mind. They had invited Izuku and their mom over to share some great news, and while he was excited, he couldn't help the dread threatening to overtake him. He had been invited to his first hero gala, having been nominated for an award even though he was still a provisional hero. They were allowing him to bring a guest, and he couldn't think of anyone else he would rather bring than his little brother. Keigo and Rumi had been wanting to bring Izuku to these events for years, but the kid had always been pretty private about his connection to heroes. After the community center opened up, it seemed he was more comfortable being in the public eye. Izuku insisted on using his connections to help people versus personal gain, and he deserved a fun night out meeting the heroes he looked up to while getting a taste of his future life as a pro. While he was extremely excited to share this experience with his younger brother, his anxiety was due to a completely different reason. He would be there, and Dabi wasn't sure how he would react at the sight of the man. In the deep recesses of his mind, he wondered if the man would even recognize him, his stomach twisting at the idea of being taken away from this new family. Although he was an adult, he wouldn't underestimate the power of the man he feared the most. His phone went off, pulling him out of his thoughts and alerting him that his family was there. He felt some of the tension and fear melt from his shoulders as his mom gave him a tight hug, seeming to sense his anxiety somehow. She gave him a subtle look of concern, but thankfully she kept her worry to herself. Izuku seemed to notice his strange mood as well, sending a short glare towards Keigo before Dabi squeezed his shoulder and shook his head. Izuku relaxed a bit, but his eyes kept drifting to his older brother as they walked into the living room making small talk. A part of him loved that his family was so in tune with his emotions, but it also made it difficult to hide how he was feeling during situations like this. They settled in on the couches, his mom and brother across from them as Keigo settled in at his side. His boyfriend squeezed his knee in encouragement, giving him the last push he needed to get through this. "So, you two said you had good news." His mom sipped at her tea, her eyes shining with pride as she watched the couple. Yes." Dabi cleared his throat and sat up straight, his mind drifting to the presentations he used to do in school. "They are your family. They will be happy for you." His mind quickly reminded him. They watched on in anticipation, and Keigo was practically buzzing with excitement at his side. "I got a call from the Hero Commission inviting me to my first gala, and I am nominated for an award." He rushed the words out, but the tears gathering in his mom's eyes made it clear that she had understood. Izuku began crying as well, mumbling underneath his breath as he tried to figure out what award Dabi had been nominated for. His mom stood up and wrapped her arms around him, telling him how proud she was and how she always knew he would be an amazing hero. Izuku followed suit, and soon he was wrapped in a group hug with everyone. A warm feeling bloomed in his chest, and he couldn't believe how lucky he was. The fear he felt earlier began to dissipate completely, and he knew the people he loved would protect him no matter what. He was pretty sure his mom would tear society down with her bare hands before returning him to that man's grasp. Everyone slowly began to calm down, and Dabi thought this was the best time to reveal the second piece of news. One more thing. He softly pulled out of the hug and made sure he could see his mom and brother's faces. They looked at him with interest, waiting to celebrate with him. "I can bring a guest, and I think my little brother would be the perfect person to join me for my first hero gala." He smiled and ruffled Izuku's hair, but the kid was looking at him in shock. "You want me to join you?" It came out as a whisper, and the words caused Dabi's heart to crack a bit. "Of course, kiddo." Dabi pulled the boy into a crushing hug before he could even respond, and the two of them stayed like that for a while until Izuku pulled back. "I think I'm ready to be in the public eye, especially if it can help other quirkless kids see what's possible." Keigo choked out a sob and clutched his chest at the boy's words, and they all were impressed by how mature the teen was. He was always thinking about how he could help others, the true mark of a great hero. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." His mom kissed his forehead and squeezed him tight, her eyes leaking tears as she smiled down at him. Keigo wrapped an arm around his waist, and a feeling of warmth spread over him as they talked about the gala a bit more. This was his home, and no one would be able to take it away from him. Gremlins. Izuku added 40 to the chat. Green Gremlin. Guys, this is my new friend Urashi. We fought today at UA. Pink Gremlin. Izuku, you can't keep making friends through battle. Sleepy Gremlin. Ike. May. It seems to be working for him so far. Speed Gremlin. Hello, Urashi. My name is Tenya Ayada. It is a pleasure to meet you. 50. Hello. It is very nice to meet you as well. Sleepy Gremlin. I am Hitoshi Yamezawa. Welcome to the chaos. Pink Gremlin. May Majima. At your service. 40. Hello. It is nice to meet you both. Izuku changed 40 to Wine Gremlin. Green Gremlin. Welcome to the family, Urashi. His mom readjusted his tie for what felt like the 1000th time, her lips moving as she quietly muttered to herself as she straightened out the knot yet again. Izuku always knew he had gotten the habit from her, but it was interesting to see it done right in front of him. The doorbell rang, pulling her out of her head as she glanced up at the clock in momentary panic. She sighed when she realized her oldest son was early, her smile returning as she turned towards the door. Your brother almost gave me a heart attack. She half-heartedly huffed as she made her way to open the door, all while Izuku playfully rolled his eyes at her antics. He knew she was excited and worried, not only for her children but for the rest of the family as well. It would be the first time that they all attended a gala like this, and Izuku knew she secretly wished she was there to make sure things went smoothly. Isamu had been too chicken to ask her to be his date to the event, but he was certain that Rumi or any of the other single heroes would have been happy to bring her along. His mother was fairly stubborn, though, so no amount of coaxing would have convinced her to go without a formal invitation. The door opened to reveal Dabi in a dark blue suit, his green locks shaved into an undercut and styled into sharp points. There were light blue gems dotting his ears and nose, and black eyeliner sculpted his eyes. Izuku was happy that his brother let him style tonight's outfit, and he was glad to see the confident smile on his brother's face. Hey, Ma. Dabi greeted the short woman in front of him, giving her a tight hug before moving back so that she could get a good look at him. My babies are all grown up. She wiped a tear from her eyes before pulling him inside. She insisted on taking pictures, and both of her boys were happy to oblige her request. You look sharp, Squirt. Dabi nudged his shoulder as they switched poses, both of them trying not to squint as their mother's camera flashed in their direction. Izuku did feel very confident in his outfit, though he had gone a bit more low-key with his suit for the night. He wore red, his favorite color, but kept his accessories and makeup to the bare minimum. Tonight was a night for Dabi to shine, and Izuku didn't want to bring more attention to himself than necessary. He was already going to be the quirkless brother of one of Japan's rising heroes. He didn't want the fashion police critiquing his outfit choice too hard. Once they were done with pictures, it was time to go, and Keigo seemed to time his arrival perfectly as a black limousine pulled up in front of the house. The blonde stepped out to greet Inko, his smile wide as he took in the 3 Midoriyas in front of him. You guys look amazing, he said cheerfully before pulling Inko into a hug. His eyes lingered on Dabi for a few minutes, and he gave his boyfriend a quick peck to the cheek before turning to hug Izuku as well. The blonde was wearing a golden shirt with a dark brown suit, his golden necklace and accessories fitting perfectly with the look. His hair was gelled back a bit more than usual, and Izuku didn't miss the way Dabi smiled at the man as they all said their goodbyes. His mother took a few more pictures before the 3 of them piled into the limo, ready for a night of mingling with heroes. The 3 of them began chatting about anything that came to mind, though Izuku didn't miss the way Dabi's knee bounced throughout the ride. He did everything he could to ease his brother's nerves, but he knew there was little he could do. Keigo sensed his boyfriend's anxiety as well, and he began to talk about how excited he was to share a table with the entire family. The idea of being surrounded by their support network seemed to calm Dabi a bit, his shoulders dropping a bit as they approached the gala. Izuku's phone buzzed in his pocket, his home screen lighting up with messages from the group chat he had with his friends. Urashi had sent a message wishing them all luck, and Izuku made a mental note to plan something fun for them all to do soon. He didn't want his friend to feel left out when the rest of the group had events like this. The flashing lights of the cameras pulled Izuku's attention away from his phone as they pulled up to the venue. Hundreds of fans flanked the vehicle as the limo slowed down in front of the entrance, with journalists arching their necks to see which heroes would be stepping out in front of them. You ready, kid? Keigo squeezed Izuku's shoulder and smiled down at him, allowing one more tender moment between them before he turned on his Hawk's persona. Izuku took a deep breath, taking in the weight of the moment before nodding his head. Let's go. He followed Keigo and Dabi out of the car, trailing back a bit so that the media could get pictures of Japan's hottest young hero couple. All of his media training with his Uncle Mike and Aunt Nem was coming in handy right now, and his nerves were quickly overtaken by adrenaline. Screaming fans surrounded them on all sides, but their faces were blurred out by the flashing camera lights. They had only taken a few steps before Dabi pulled him forward, wrapping his arm around his little brother and posing for pictures. Azure, is this the little brother we hear so much about? A reporter asked excitedly as he stuck a microphone in Dabi's face. Izuku knew Dabi had started talking about him and his mom more in interviews, but he didn't realize anyone would actually perceive him tonight. He flashed a shy yet confident smile as he fought down his nerves, sliding into the role of the adorable baby brother. Dabi grinned and carefully ruffled Izuku's hair and squeezed him tighter. "Yup, I thought I would take my baby bro to his first hero gala." The statement generated a round of coos from the audience, and Izuku fought off the temptation to pout. He knew he was cute, but he was also a highly skilled person that deserved respect. Keigo seemed to sense his dilemma, but the asshole just grinned in his direction as he took Dabi's hand in his. The trio walked down the rest of the carpet together, all three of them being asked for pictures and interviews. It seemed word had quickly spread that Izuku was one of the founders for the Musutafu Center, and he was thankful he always had a few talking points memorized for situations like this. He thought he would be more anxious, but the adrenaline in his kept him energetic as they reached the end of the media frenzy. Once they were inside the building, it was much less chaotic, though the chatter of excited heroes and sidekicks surrounded them. Many heroes came up to greet them, and Izuku's hand itched to take notes as he listened in on the conversations. There were so many people there tonight, and so many quirks he had never seen in person before. He had brought a mini journal with him, but he had learned it would probably be rude to ask the heroes a bunch of questions during this type of event. As they made their way to their seats, he made mental notes of the most interesting heroes there, hoping he could arrange meetings with them through his connection to Netsu. "Zuku," Mei's voice called out, and he quickly found his friends seated together at one of the round tables. Dabi and Hawks followed him as they made their way to the rest of the family. The kids had their own table while the adults took up two separate tables next to them. Rumi waved Keigo and Dabi over, pointing to the two empty seats between her and Tensei. "Hey, you kids look great." Mike stood up and gave the three of them a hug, and Uncle Shota's eyes shined with pride as he looked them over. Netsu climbed up Izuku's shoulder and greeted him before complimenting Dabi and Keigo on their looks. Genist was standing a few tables over talking to a few sidekicks from his agency, but he sent a wink of acknowledgement in their direction. "You look precious," Auntie Nem said as she stood up, pulling Aunt Emmy behind her. Both women were wearing each other's colors, and they fretted over every detail of Izuku's look before turning their attention towards Dabi and Keigo. "Thanks, guys." Dabi blushed as the two women told him how handsome he looked. "You're so cute when you get shy." Keigo smirked and wrapped an arm around his boyfriend. Izuku made a show of gagging and turned around to find Isamu, Higari, and Vlad King coming back from the bar. All three men were wearing simple black suits, but each had their own accessories that matched their personalities. "Look at you, little shooter, you clean up well." Isami looked like he wanted to ruffle Izuku's hair but held himself back. "Red, good color," Vlad said simply before taking his seat next to Hound Dog at the table. The counselor simply nodded in Izuku's direction, and Izuku smiled back at the man. "You kids look great. We have to get a group photo later," Higari said, but Mei quickly interrupted her father. "Dad, you've already taken hundreds of pictures tonight," she huffed, her sparkly overalls bunching up as she crossed her arms and pouted. Everyone laughed at her outburst, finally taking their seats at their respective tables. Izuku finally got the chance to greet his friends, and his excitement for the night was only growing. "Your suit came together very nicely, Izuku," Tenya exclaimed, his voice practically echoing in the room. His friend was wearing a navy blue suit with silver accessories, with the Ida family crest pinned to his lapel. "Yeah, you're looking a little less edgy than usual," Hitoshi quipped. Izuku turned towards the adults to make sure none of them were looking before flipping his friend off and sticking his tongue out. "And you're wearing purple, how surprising," he deadpanned, dodging the half-hearted punch Hitoshi sent his way. "Mei, I love the sparkles." Izuku gestured at her outfit, clapping when she stood to spin and show it off. She had sparkles practically everywhere, from her hair and makeup to her shoes. The look was so her that it made Izuku smile, and he was glad she was able to express herself this way. He wished Himiko was there with them, but she had explained that she was more comfortable relaxing at home and watching movies. She did promise to try to come to the next event with them, but Izuku didn't want to pressure her into anything. He knew that healing took its time, and he wouldn't want her to push herself too soon. The adults began telling each other stories about their recent patrols while the kids discussed anything that came to mind as they waited on their meals. They were planning their next movie night when a beautiful woman approached their table with a younger girl clutching at her arm. The girl had long black hair and nervous eyes, her anxiety eliciting a protective feeling in Izuku's heart as the woman began to speak. "Hello, my name is Amy Yaoyorozu," the woman greeted before gesturing down towards her daughter. "This is my daughter, Momo." The girl waved, yet her eyes stayed planted on the ground. "My husband and I saw that you have a few children with you, and we were wondering if Momo can sit with them." "I know it gets boring sitting with the adults at these types of events." Amy spoke confidently, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. Before any of the adults could answer, it was Hitoshi that spoke first. She can sit with us, it's no problem at all. The boy gestured towards one of the empty seats at the table. Amy smiled gratefully and Momo quietly took the seat, mumbling a polite thank you as she finally looked up and looked over the people in front of her. We'll keep an eye on her. Uncle Mike smiled warmly and introduced himself to the woman. The adults all began talking to her and her husband came over and introduced himself as well, while the children greeted their newest arrival. I'm Izuku Midoriya, Azure's little brother. Izuku introduced himself, listening as the rest of his group did the same. It seems you are the same age as us, Yaorazu. Tenya commented after overhearing her parents discussing her plans for high school. You can call me Yamomo, the girl corrected, a shy blush growing on her cheeks as she waited for their response to the nickname. Sounds good, Yamomo, they replied with a smile. Their food finally arrived, and their new friend seemed content with just listening in on the conversation for a while as they ate. Izuku mentioned a book that Tenya had recommended to him and the girl's eyes shone with excitement. She began to share her thoughts before slapping a hand over her mouth. I apologize, you're already familiar with the book and its themes. She seemed to deflate a bit, and Izuku wouldn't have that. No, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. He smiled, and was grateful when the rest of his friends nodded their heads with interest. After that she seemed to open up, confidently sharing her opinions and knowledge on any of the topics they were discussing. She was clearly very intelligent, though her confidence seemed lacking when it came to her abilities. That would be something Izuku would look into as he got to know the girl more. One of the servers was removing plates from the table when their arm accidentally brushed Mei's head, snapping one of her earrings and causing it to fall from the ground. The woman apologized profusely, nearly on the verge of tears as she probably feared retaliation from a pro hero at the sight of his child's broken jewelry. They waved her off, and Hagari quickly came over to see what was going on. The man calmed the woman down and sent her on her way before promising to buy Mei a new pair as soon as he could. The whole scene caught the attention of both the adults and children, but Izuku didn't miss the faint glowing from across the table. He looked over to find Yamomo staring intently at Mei's other earring while her hand hovered over her arm. His eyes widened as she pulled something out of her arm and smiled with satisfaction. Mei, please take this. The pink-haired girl turned in curiosity before her eyes lit up with awe and excitement as she grabbed the new earring. She immediately put it in her ear and used her phone as a mirror, dancing in her seat as she saw it was a perfect match. How? She exclaimed, her eyes darting between her reflection and their friend. Tenya and Hitoshi were looking between the two girls with curiosity, and Izuku had already taken out his small notebook. Screw manners, he had to write this one down. My quirk is called creation. She gestured at her exposed left arm and paused for a moment before pulling a marble out of the sparkling flesh. She explained that she could create non-living things as long as she knew the chemical makeup of them. Izuku's heart raced as he took notes, already doodling ideas and questions in the margins of the page. Mei was practically bouncing with excitement, and the two girls began talking about their passion for science. You have to be setting a record for adopting people at this point, Hitoshi joked as he watched Mei and Momo chatting. Izuku rolled his eyes and shrugged, already planning a lab visit for Yamomo in the near future. Heroes began approaching their tables as they waited for the next part of the gala to start, many of them seeming intimidated by the number of top heroes gathered at one table. Sidekicks, heroes, and industry professionals all made their way over to greet them and congratulate them on their various nominations. Fat Gum had spent a few minutes talking to Izuku about his quirk, and the man seemed very interested in Momo's ability as well. Izuku could see a future mentorship in the cards, and he'd keep that in mind for when they all were in high school. You're Mr. Popular tonight. Rumi teased Dabi, and Keigo softly tickled his boyfriend's side to tease him further. Stop. Dabi blushed and pushed his hand away, and he seemed on the verge of saying something else before he suddenly went very still. Izuku noticed the shift in his brother's energy immediately, and when his eyes darted up his stomach dropped to the floor. Standing behind Sho and Mike was the towering figure of the number 2 hero, Endeavor. The man still had his flaming facial hair on, his intense and judging glare gliding over the table before his eyes finally landed on Dabi. The entire family sat in tense silence, immediately shifting into protection mode. Whether they had their suspicions about his parentage or not, it was clear that Dabi was terrified of this man. It's strange that a hero with such a powerful fire quirk isn't working at the Endeavor agency. Endeavor's voice sounded bored, but there was a hint of accusation there. Dabi stared up at the man, his eyes frozen in shock and terror as his brain seemed to search for a response. Why would he want to be your sidekick when he can shine as a hero in his own right? Keigo bit back, his arm wrapped around Dabi's shoulders protectively. Izuku had the sudden urge to claw the man's eyes out, but he kept himself calm for the sake of his older brother. Endeavor scoffed, his eyes briefly landing on Keigo before returning to Dabi. Whenever you're ready to make the right choice, there is a position waiting for you at my agency. The hero pulled a business card out of his suit pocket and extended it out, clearly expecting Dabi to take it. Genist reached up and snatched the card away, before stuffing it in his front pocket, his eyes blaring with an anger Izuku had only seen during his last day at Aldera. I'm happy to see you haven't grown out of your brutish ways, Endeavor, the blonde quipped before turning away, clearly dismissing the number 2 hero. Endeavor sneered for a moment but closed his eyes and took a deep breath, an action that seemed to surprise everyone at the table. Once he calmed himself down, he stepped to the side, revealing a boy with two-toned hair and eyes. Dabi sucked in a breath when the youngest Todoroki boy was brought forward by his father, and Izuku watched the interaction carefully. There was a large burn scar on the left side of his face and an anger in his eyes that rivaled his father's. Izuku related to that anger, but it still concerned him greatly. This is my son, Shoto. Endeavor gestured at the boy, his face contorting a bit in uncertainty as he thought over his next words. He wanted to know if he could sit with the other children. The man who acted so aggressively now seemed like any other father awkwardly trying to get his child to make friends. Everyone at the table seemed to pause for a moment, reeling at the sudden change in tone from the fiery hero. Mike was the first to recover, looking at the young Todoroki boy with a soothing smile. There is definitely room for you, if you'd like to join the kiddos. The blonde hero watched as Shoto hesitantly made his way to sit next to Momo, who waved at him with recognition. All right, we'll keep an eye on him. You can go back to whatever table you were sitting at now. While Mike was smiling, his words cut through the air like a threat. Endeavor nodded, looking to Shoto and then sparing one last glance towards Dabi. Think about that offer, he said before turning and walking off. The entire group let out a sigh at once, though Dabi still sat stiffly until Keigo squeezed his shoulder. Tension seeped out of the man almost immediately, and the light atmosphere finally returned once the number 2 hero was out of their sight. Izuku turned towards their newest arrival, unable to get a read on the boy that seemed to be eyeing them like a scared animal. I'm Izuku Midoriya, he waved, trying his best to give a reassuring smile as the rest of the table introduced themselves. Momo explained that she and Todoroki had known each other for a long time, both of their parents dragging them to events like this throughout their childhoods. It is nice to meet you, Todoroki, Tenya said politely, and those mismatched eyes drifted towards the blue-haired boy with trepidation. Call me Shoto. The words were spoken in a firm whisper. Izuku predicted that the sudden familiarity wasn't due to Shoto feeling comfortable around them, but from a need to distance himself from his father's last name. No problem, you can call me Izuku, he replied, and he shared a concerned glance with Hitoshi as the conversation continued. His purple-haired friend was clearly on edge, and Izuku remembered something he had told him once. Abused kids can always recognize other abused kids. Izuku remembered what Dabi had told them about his childhood, and though he didn't have confirmation that Endeavor was his brother's father, those words still ran through his head. Keigo caught Izuku's eye. The normally laid-back hero's golden gaze was filled with barely contained rage. When you have a family full of heroes, it is hard to keep a secret, and it had always been pretty evident who Dabi's father was. They would wait for him to tell them, not wanting to break his trust or traumatize him even further. This was unfamiliar territory, though, as they had never expected the man to actually confront Dabi like this. Looking into Shoto's sad, angry eyes and Dabi's deflated posture made Izuku itch to bring down the number 2 hero even more than before. But he would wait, if only to respect the wishes of those that were most affected. Slowly things returned to normal, with everyone chatting and breaking off into their own conversations. Shoto seemed content just listening in, occasionally whispering something to Momo or the rest of the group. Isamu came over to the table and leaned over to talk to Izuku, though the freckled boy noticed a pair of mismatched eyes watching them carefully. I talked to your mom and I'll be driving you home tonight, since those two are probably going to be hitting all of the after parties. The man pointed to where Keigo and Dabi were drinking champagne and smiling, and it was clear the two were ready to get out of the stuffy gala and enjoy the rest of their night. Thanks, Isamu. He was happy that he could always count on the man to think of things before he got the chance to. It was nice to have that type of support. It felt different than what he got from Genist or even Uncle Sho, like he was a constant part of Isamu's thoughts. The hero went back to his seat, and Izuku turned to find Shoto staring at him intensely. Are you Snipe's son? The question cut through the air, causing all of the children and the adults around them to freeze. Izuku choked on his drink, causing his friends and the less mature pros to snicker. No, he is just one of my mentors. His heart was beating quickly, and he wasn't sure why the question had set him off like this. Isamu wasn't his dad, plain and simple, but for some reason the statement felt like a lie. It must be hard having so many heroes with their eyes on you, Shoto added, his eyes darting across the group like a cat taking in its surroundings. Izuku grimaced, understanding the implications of what the boy was trying to say. He felt like it was his duty to make it clear that every pro hero was not Endeavor, and that you could train someone without pushing it too far. I never feel pressured by them. They support my personal goals and give me the ability to test my limits in a safe environment. Izuku gauged Shoto's reaction to his words. A few ice crystals grew on the right side of his face. His eyes drifted down to the table as his fists clenched in front of him. I didn't realize something like that was possible. Izuku's chest tightened at the admission, and he noticed that Dabi was listening in on the interaction. The brothers locked eyes for a moment, words left unspoken as they turned back to their respective conversation. He wouldn't push the Endeavor conversation, not until his older brother was ready. But now there was someone else Izuku needed to help, and he wasn't sure how long he would be able to wait to do so. The lights began to dim, signaling the start of the second half of the gala. Smoke began to fill the stage as colorful lights flashed. Dramatic music came over the speakers as everyone waited for the host to reveal themselves. The organizers had kept it a secret, building the suspense by withholding the announcement until the grand reveal. When the silhouette of the number one hero rose up through the smoke, Izuku could understand why they had kept it so hush-hush. "Do not fear," a loud voice boomed, causing the room to break into rapturous applause. "Why?" came the next part of the infamous statement after giving the crowd time to take it in. "Because I am here." All Might clapped and dispelled the smoke in a dramatic act of showmanship as the music swelled to its climax. The crowd screeched and stood in unison as the number one hero waved and flashed his signature smile. Izuku grinned and stood, his childhood obsession with the man taking control as he watched the man take in the adoring crowd. He knew that All Might was just like other heroes, a man with responsibilities and a facade that he put on for the public. But something about seeing the hero in person for the first time brought back the nostalgia of his early childhood. After 5 straight minutes of applause, the smiling hero gestured for them to quiet down and take their seats, signaling the start of the awards portion of the event. Izuku clapped each time someone won, whether it was for best support gear or for the agency that did the most hours of community service. Keigo, Genist, Mike, and Rumi all won different awards, sending the family into a frenzy each time. All of them seemed to be waiting for the Rookie of the Year category, though. After a few more categories, it was finally time for the announcement they had been waiting on. And Dabi sat clutching Keigo's hand with his eyes clenched as All Might made his speech. These heroes might be new to the profession, but they have already proven themselves as standouts amongst their peers. The man listed the names of those nominated, including a sidekick from the Endeavor agency and a few other assorted heroes. When Azure's name was called, Izuku had to hold himself back from making any noise, his excitement overtaking him as each second passed. "The hero that has won Rookie of the Year is..." All Might paused dramatically as he unfolded the card in his hands. The room held its breath in anticipation. Azure. The room exploded, and Izuku was fairly certain his family was making most of the noise as Dabi sat in his seat with wide eyes. "You won, babe, you won." Keigo pulled Dabi to his feet and into a crushing hug, seeming to break the man out of his trance. He turned to Izuku with a single tear streaming down his face before pulling his younger brother into a hug as well. They stayed standing as Dabi walked to the stage to accept his award, all of them trying to fight the tears that threatened to escape their eyes. All Might shook his hand and handed the trophy over before stepping to the side, giving up the mic for the acceptance speech. No one knew what the man had planned to say. He had kept it a secret and claimed that it would be bad luck to share the speech. The crowd once again fell into silence, waiting for the rookie to speak. "First off, I want to say how grateful I am for this award." Dabi's voice shook a bit, but he coughed into his hand and continued. "I never thought that being a hero would be possible for me, even when I was a kid." Izuku watched with a proud smile as his brother addressed the room. "I had given up, and was honestly on a pretty bad path until I met someone very important to me." Dabi's eyes seemed to zone in on where Izuku was sitting. "My little brother, Izuku, has shown me what being a hero is really about. That sometimes the best way to save someone is to reach your hand out to them when they need it most." Hitoshi squeezed Izuku's shoulder in comfort, and Izuku watched with tear-filled eyes as his brother thanked their family and made a shout-out to their mom. Dabi made his way off stage after shaking hands with All Might, receiving hugs and congratulations from heroes as he passed them. Izuku practically tackled him into a hug when he got back to his table. "You asshole, you made me cry." He spoke into his brother's chest, squeezing him tightly before letting go. "Good, my evil plan worked." Dabi laughed and kissed the top of Izuku's head before pulling Keigo in for a hug. The couple kissed, causing Rumi and Tensei to fake gag dramatically. The ceremony came to an end and groups of heroes began approaching their table to congratulate Dabi on his award. Gang Orca talked with the young hero for a while, his words of encouragement seeming to impact his older brother in a profound way. Shoto kept his eyes on Dabi the entire time, and Izuku wondered if the boy somehow recognized him. Yamomo gave them all her number and asked to hang out again, and surprisingly Shoto did the same. He explained that he wasn't normally on his phone but that he wanted to train with them all sometime. His eyes landed on Dabi for a few moments, then shifted back to Izuku. "I will plan a get-together at my home. We can enjoy some wonderful tea," Momo offered, and Izuku could already tell this friendship would be long-lived. He would have to ask Nezu for some of his specialty blend for the occasion. Mei gave the girl a tight hug before she said her goodbyes, and Izuku was happy that she had found another girl to befriend. He could already tell he would be seeing Momo in the lab sooner than later. As he was putting his number into Izuku's phone, the number 2 hero once again appeared behind him. The man stared at the phone with furrowed brows before turning to his son. "Charity work looks good for a future number 1 hero, but don't let yourself get distracted." He patted Shoto on the shoulder and walked away, leaving the 2 boys to process what he had said. "Sorry, he's kind of an asshole," Shoto finally said, his face emotionless as he handed Izuku his phone. There were a few seconds of silence before both boys began to laugh. It seemed his new friend's icy exterior was just a defense mechanism, after all. He hugged everyone goodbye and congratulated Dabi one last time before telling him to be safe at the after-parties. Keigo, Rumi, and Tensei were sure to keep the man out all night to celebrate. Isamu led him to the parking garage and the 2 of them got in his truck, both sighing in relief as they undid their ties and took their suit jackets off. The hero removed his signature helmet and massaged his scalp with his eyes closed in contentment. Country music played softly in the background, the English lyrics soothing Izuku into a sense of relaxation. They drove in comfortable silence for a while before Isamu made an unexpected turn, and the boy immediately perked up when he saw where they were headed. "Thought we both deserved a little treat after a long night of socializing," his mentor said with a soft smile. Once they had gotten their milkshakes and a side of fries, they continued their journey home. Though Izuku felt like the man had something he wanted to say, his suspicions were proven correct when Isamu turned down the radio and cleared his throat. "There's something I wanted to ask you about, Izuku." He knew it was serious when the man used his actual name, and he hummed as a sign for him to continue. Izuku had a feeling he already knew what this was about, but he took a sip of his drink instead of voicing those thoughts. "We both know your mother is an amazing woman, and I feel like her and I have grown close over the years." Isamu was clearly nervous, but he spoke firmly and confidently. "I wouldn't want to put the relationship you and I have at risk, but I have been thinking about this for a while." Isamu took a deep breath before continuing. "I wanted to know if you'd have any objections to me asking her on a date." Izuku laughed at the question, and he chose to mess with the man a bit. "I thought you guys were already dating." Isamu began to stutter and blush, but quickly got a hold of himself as they pulled up to a red light. "I'll take that as permission to ask her out," he finally said, and Izuku couldn't help but smile. "I don't know why you needed my permission in the first place," Izuku replied. His mom was a very strong and independent person. He didn't have any say in what she did or who she chose to date. They stopped at another red light, and Isamu turned to him with a smile. "You're a part of the package, kiddo." His mentor ruffled his hair before turning his attention back to the road. Izuku's chest tightened as a strange feeling wrapped itself around him. He had always been close to his uncles. He had Dabi and Keigo to look up to, as well as the rest of the men that had come into his life over the years. Ever since he was a child, he had told himself that he didn't need a father, that his mother provided him with everything that he could want in life. As much as he tried to lie to himself, his eyes had always lingered on the way Mr. Bakugo had loved his son so freely. His attention was always drawn to children at the park with their parents, children that never had to worry about the absence of their fathers. A small part of Izuku had always yearned for it, and the minute he became close to Isamu, he had secretly wished for it to become a reality. But he had never let himself hope too openly, never letting his thoughts escape in case they ruined everything. He knew Isamu cared for him deeply, but it was kind of nice to know that love wasn't just an extension of the man's feelings for his mom. "You're a part of the package." Isamu had said it with so much certainty, like it was the most obvious conclusion in the world. Izuku didn't reply. He didn't know if he could even form the words to describe what he was feeling at that moment. He simply smiled and let a few tears escape from his eyes, his heart hammering in his chest as they got closer to the house. Isamu parked the car and took a deep breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that the veins in his hands popped out a bit. "Relax, you know she is going to say yes," Izuku teased as he gathered their trash and stepped out of the car. He paused for a moment, recognizing the perfect opportunity to torment the man who was trying to court his mother. The boy ducked back down and tried his best to maintain a serious expression. "If you hurt her, I will make you disappear." He stood up and shut the door before he could see Isamu's expression, but he could only imagine the shocked look on his face. He cackled as he unlocked the door and stepped in the house, his eyes landing on his mother's figure on the couch. She had her nose buried in a book and a mug of hot tea on the table next to her. Her reading glasses were sitting at the tip of her nose and her hair was pulled back with a cat ear headband. She looked up and smiled, immediately putting her book down to stand and hug her son. "How was the gala, honey?" She pulled him into her chest tightly and placed a kiss on his head, but he could sense the moment she saw Isamu standing in the doorway. She stiffened for a moment before relaxing again, her hand jumping to push her glasses up and pat her hair down. Izuku tried not to laugh as he answered her question. It was great. Dabi won his award and we made some new friends. He pulled back and smiled up at his mom, though he added in a fake yawn as she went to greet Isamu. I'll tell you more tomorrow. I am going to head to bed. He winked at Isamu and turned to walk up the stairs. The man looked nervous, but he knew that things would work out. He couldn't wait for the shovel talk the rest of the family would give him whenever they decided to share the news. Katsuki picked up the snack tray and carried it into the living room where his dad was channel surfing. There was a hero gala tonight, and many of the heroes were wearing Bakugo designs. The family had created a tradition of watching events and seeing their creations in action, and Katsuki grew a secret fondness towards the time spent with his parents gathered around the TV. He'd never admit that to them, though. Therapy had been helping, but he still had trouble expressing his more vulnerable emotions verbally. He was certain that his parents knew he enjoyed spending time with them, even if the only evidence was the elaborate snacks he made for the occasion. Their coffee table was filled with various spreads of meats, fruits, breads, and small sandwiches that he had spent the last few hours perfecting. His mom followed behind him with 2 pitchers, one for the adults and one for him. She always enjoyed making new concoctions, finding joy in the challenge of preparing something that tasted just as good without any alcohol in it. The live stream of the gala red carpet filled their screen, and the trio settled into the couch for a night of fashion commentary and relaxation. They watched as the nation's top heroes graced the red carpet, all of them dressed to impress in the latest collection. It was interesting to see his parents' designs come to life like this, all of them standing out amongst the sea of statement pieces. I'm not usually one for pinstripes, but they seem to work well with his aesthetic, his father commented as they watched Gang Orca answer a few questions. Katsuki hummed in agreement, his eyes taking in the various accessories the hero had chosen to wear. He noticed a pin on the hero's chest, one they had seen throughout the night. Heroes for quirky quality. He recognized the logo in the bottom right corner and his chest tightened with a mix of feelings. The sour tang of guilt stirred together with the sweet taste of pride, and his gaze remained on the pin until the audio clipped away from Gang Orca and the interviewer. We just got word that 2 of our favorite young heroes are pulling up. A woman's voice spoke as the view changed to the entrance of the red carpet as a limousine pulled up. Let's see what Hawks and Azure are wearing tonight. Katsuki froze, memories of that day at Aldera flashing through his mind as he watched Hawks step out of the car with a confident smile. He turned to extend his hand to his boyfriend, and Azure stepped onto the carpet behind him. Japan's hottest young hero couple looks amazing as always, the woman complimented, and Katsuki had to agree. Their suits were tasteful while showing off their personal styles. Their accessories were carefully curated and elevated their looks. He was so focused on dissecting the men's outfits that he almost missed the small gasp his mother let out when she saw who stood behind the 2 men. Questions he had tried to bury after the incident came flooding back as he saw a familiar pair of green eyes and freckled cheeks come into the view of the camera. His parents exchanged a concerned glance as Midoriya Izuku stepped confidently onto the carpet behind the 2 heroes. Deku. It was the only word that went through his mind as his childhood friend walked behind the 2 pros, politely answering questions after Azure confirmed that the boy was his little brother. Katsuki's heart hammered in his chest, all sound drowning out around him until it was a soft buzz of white noise as his eyes focused on the screen. Suddenly the feed switched over to a sidekick from Endeavor's agency, and he let out a deep sigh. It seems he would never be able to escape the long and complicated history he shared with the green-haired boy, and he wasn't sure that he wanted to. Everything that had happened had shaped him into the boy he was, and the hero he would hopefully become. He half-heartedly watched the rest of the gala, his mind elsewhere as he wondered what he should do next. Gremlins. Green Gremlin Izuku. I hate to say it, but I think we have outgrown our gremlin nicknames. Pink Gremlin May. Agreed, we can do better. Green Gremlin has granted admin privileges to all parties. Green Gremlin added 50 and 50. Mean Green Bean Izuku. XXXXXX. Hello. Thank you all for adding me to the chat. XXXXXX. This is Yamomo. XXXXXX. I apologize, but I am not sure what to label myself as in this chat. The Inventor May. I got you. The Inventor changed 60's name to God. God Momo. Oh goodness. I appreciate the name, but isn't it a bit much? Mean Green Bean Izuku. Nope, it's perfect. God Momo. Alright. Tornado Inasa. Hello new friend. Ada Tenya. It is nice to speak to you again. Yeah Momo. I like Katsatoshi. Tenya. Your nickname can't be your actual name. Ada Tenya. Lightning McQueen Tenya. Is that better? I like Katsatoshi. Amazing. Todoroki Shoto. Hello. Tornado Inasa. Wait. Todoroki as an Endeavor. Todoroki Shoto. Yes. Tornado Inasa. Your dad is an asshole. Todoroki Shoto. Yes. Tornado Inasa. Nice to meet you. Todoroki Shoto. You as well. Todoroki Shoto. I would like to request a nickname as well. Mean Green Bean Izuku. HMMMMMMMMMM. Mean Green Bean has changed Todoroki Shoto's nickname to Candy Cane. Mean Green Bean Izuku. This should do for now. Once we learn more about you, we can help you get a new one. Candy Cane Shoto, I like it. Thank you, Candy Cane Shoto. My father will be out of town for 2 days within the next 2 weeks. I would like to plan a gathering for us while he is unable to interfere with my activities. Lightning McQueen Tenya. Normally I would not encourage going against your parents, but I have to say I support it this time. God Momo. Yes, I would also enjoy getting together. God Momo. My parents said they would love to have you all over for tea and a day of fun. Mean Green Bean Izuku. Let's do it. Izuku let his body sink into the cold concrete beneath him as he shut his eyes, the back of his hands pressing into the ground as he attempted to think. He had been trying to improve UAS virtual security when he ran into a coding problem, and he wanted to try to figure it out on his own before he went to Higari or Nedzu with his dilemma. He had momentarily forgotten that he was in the third-year lab when he heard the door open, his ears following the 2 pairs of footsteps as they walked deeper into the room. The duo abruptly stopped a few feet away from him, clearly confused by his current position. Midoriya, you okay? The voice sounded like it belonged to Tanaka, one of his favorite upperclassmen at UA. Izuku nodded his head and mumbled out something along the lines of "I'm thinking." The support corps students seemed to recognize the condition he was in, as they simply turned and continued their conversation on the way to their own workstation. He continued laying on the ground until he felt the familiar presence of Higari looming over him. Izuku cracked open an eye and glanced up at the unamused face of his mentor. What have I told you about laying on the floor? The teacher tried to look disappointed, but his amused tone gave him away instantly. Izuku stuck his tongue out before hopping onto his feet, the action spawning an idea to begin forming in his head. He shot forward as though he had been struck by lightning, completely ignoring Higari's calls behind him. The man would have to scold him for running in the lab later. He had work to do. Once his fingers hit the keyboard, time seemed to still. His mind whirred as he worked through each problem as it arose, his laser focus causing him to lose track of how long he had been sitting at the computer. He had just finished upgrading one of the firewalls when his stomach began to growl. It must be lunchtime already, he thought to himself as he checked his phone for the time. His eyes widened when he saw that there was only 10 minutes left in the school day. Izuku quickly packed his things and shut down his computer before sticking his head into Higari's office to say goodbye. He needed to do his end-of-the-day review with Nedzu before he left. One last check-in to make sure Izuku was utilizing his time and skills wisely. He slid into the door as soon as it opened and hopped over to the principal's desk, where his mentor was preparing them a pot of tea to enjoy while they chatted. Izuku, I have to say your work today truly impressed me. I can tell you have been working hard on your coding skills. Nedzu grinned as he clasped his hands together, and Izuku beamed with pride. Nedzu was a very encouraging teacher, but he would never compliment work he did not truly admire. I'm just happy I could work through the different issues that came up throughout the day. Izuku smiled before taking a sip of tea. Before we know it, you'll be moving into the number 2 spot. Nedzu winked at the inside joke. The principal was referring to his list of preferred successors, a list which currently included Izuku and Shota. His tired uncle currently held the number 2 spot, much to his displeasure. Izuku laughed, though he was pleased by the praise and encouragement. They finished their conversation and Nedzu dismissed him due to a meeting he had to prepare for. Izuku gathered his things and left the office, deciding to pop his head into the teacher's lounge to say goodbye to anyone still lingering there. He found Ectoplasm reading a particularly interesting book about the principles of calculus, and he decided he had a few minutes to chat about the topic. The hero was excited that someone else was familiar with the author, and the two spent the next hour sharing their thoughts and theories about the different branches of mathematics. Izuku's phone buzzed in his pocket with a text from his mother, and he excused himself from the conversation. He was ready to enjoy some quality time with his mother and whoever else decided to show up at their dinner table that night. He was thinking over a particularly interesting equation he had discussed with Ectoplasm as he walked down the hall, his mind distracted as he made his way towards the front entrance. His instincts reacted a moment too late as he bumped into someone in front of him, but thankfully he was able to stop his momentum before he knocked them over. I'm so sorry. He bowed an apology before looking up to find an older blonde man looking down at him kindly. It's all right, my boy. You seem to be deep in thought. The man smiled down at him, and Izuku felt like he had seen him somewhere. He couldn't place where he had seen the stranger before, but something about him made Izuku feel calm around him. Izuku apologized once again before excusing himself, but the man reached out a hand to stop him. I am sorry to ask, but would you mind walking me to the entrance? I'm a bit turned around here, the stranger asked with an embarrassed smile. Izuku immediately agreed and the pair began making small talk on their way to the exit. The man had introduced himself as Toshinori Yagi, a consultant in the hero industry. Yagi had been the one to meet with Nedzu earlier, and Izuku stopped himself from asking too many questions about the meeting. He didn't want to reveal himself as Nedzu's personal student just yet, especially since he had just met the man. They began talking about Izuku's studies and his goals, and Yagi was excited to hear that Izuku wanted to become a hero. "You must have an exceptional quirk," Yagi commented, causing Izuku's stomach to twist in a knot. He gave the man the benefit of the doubt, hoping the comment was a general platitude and not evidence of any discriminatory beliefs. "Actually, I'm quirkless." Izuku kept his eyes forward as he walked, but he saw Yagi pause for a moment as he took his words in. The man grimaced before he continued walking by Izuku's side. There were a tense few minutes where neither of them spoke, and a sour feeling erupted in his gut. "Do you think quirkless people can be heroes?" Izuku asked, his heart racing as he waited for a response. He wasn't sure why this man's opinion was so important to him, but he waited with bated breath for Yaga's reply. The man stopped walking and looked down at Izuku once more, his eyes glittering with sadness as he thought over his words. "No, I do not." He looked down at the ground in shame, though the gesture only made Izuku angry. Before he could reply, a polite voice spoke up. "Yagi, I believe we have a few more things to cover before I dismiss you for the day." Nedzu grinned from behind them, and Izuku smiled when he saw his mentor's feral expression. Yagi stood frozen, glancing between Izuku and Nedzu a few times before standing up straight. He followed the principal down the hall, leaving Izuku to laugh at the situation. The walk to the train station was spent calming himself down, but he couldn't help but be grateful for Nedzu's quick intervention. Izuku still couldn't shake the idea that he knew Yagi from somewhere, but he didn't want to waste his time thinking about someone who clearly didn't respect quirkless people. He leaned his head back on the train, relaxing as he theorized about who would be joining them for dinner that night. There was a boy with long black hair and anxious red eyes sitting across from him, and Izuku noticed that he had a collection of Crimson Riot pins and keychains on his book bag. He had always admired the chivalrous hero, and he seemed to have adopted a knack for finding people in need of a friend over the years. "I like Crimson Riot too," he commented casually, not wanting to come on too hard and scare the boy. "Oh, really?" His red eyes sparkled with hope. The two boys chatted about their favorite heroes for the rest of the ride, eventually moving to sit together. Izuku's new friend was named Kirishima, and he went to a middle school only a few stops away from UA. Eventually, it was Kirishima's turn to get off the train, and the two boys said their goodbyes. Izuku cursed himself for not getting Kirishima's number, and he hoped they would run into each other again. He recognized the loneliness in his new friend's eyes, and he had a feeling the boy would get along well with his friends. When he arrived at home, he found Isamu, his mom, and Genus sitting around the table chatting. He greeted them before making his way to his room to change before dinner. His mind was still on his new friend, but he wouldn't abuse his hacking skills by trying to find the boy's information. He went downstairs to join his family for dinner, forgetting all about the disappointing interaction he had with Yagi. The adults, Vlad King Dracula SR. "There is a disturbance in the force. Aizawa Uncle Sleepy, is it Inko, Nedzu, or Izuku?" Mike Uncle Loud, "Oh no. What if it is all three?" Nedzu Rat God, "If you are referring to my brief moment of rage earlier, it has been taken care of." Vlad King Dracula SR, "No wonder I felt a chill go down my spine. Who was the unlucky bastard that pissed you off?" Nedzu Rat God, "It was the newest addition to the UA staff. Sukachi the man in the yellow hat. What did he do this time?" Ms. Joke Ronald McDonald, "You know this guy, detective?" Sukachi the man in the yellow hat, "Yes, we have been friends for a long time. But if he did something to piss Nedzu off, I am not so sure anymore." Inko Mamadoria, "Nedzu, what could a new teacher have done that made you so angry?" Nedzu Rat God, "I will send the video recording of the conversation I overheard, but I need you all to know this has been handled." Rat God has shared a video attachment. Aizawa Uncle Sleepy, "Hazing new teachers is still acceptable, correct? Best genus denim for Lif." Thankfully, it looks like Izuku did not take his words to heart, but this is unacceptable. Inko Mamadoria, "Nedzu, I trust that you handled this situation accordingly, but he would be wise to stay away from my child." Mike Uncle Loud, "Are we sure we want this guy around our little listeners?" Nedzu Rat God, "I promise that he has seen the error in his ways. He is also aware of the consequences if he ever does something like that again." Midnight and Y Quill, "I'll be keeping a close eye on him." Power Loader Mole Man, "Same. That type of thinking isn't welcome at UA." Snipe Yeehaw, "Nedzu, he better stay away from my boy. I won't let anyone else make Izuku feel like he hasn't earned his opportunities in life." Sukachi the man in the yellow hat, "Don't worry, I will be having a personal conversation with him shortly." On behalf of quirkless people, Izuku stood on the staircase as he looked down at Itoshi, Mei, Tenya, Inasa, and Himiko. He stood with his hands crossed behind his back like a general, eyeing each of them down before he spoke. "There will be no funny business today," he demanded, trying and failing not to smile as his friends saluted him with serious expression. "We cannot scare our new friends away," he continued, watching as they all nodded their heads in understanding. He hopped down from his stoop on the stairs and giggled, almost tackling Hitoshi on his way down. "You're the one we really have to worry about," Hitoshi joked as he softly pushed Izuku's head. "I'm so excited to meet our new friends." Himiko jumped up and down with excitement. "They are excited to meet you guys too." Izuku grinned as he went to open the front door. Isamu was leaning against the small transport van he had borrowed from UA to drive the kids around that day. "All right, kiddos, let's get this show on the road." He ruffled Izuku's hair as the rest of the kids piled into the van, pulling the boy in for a quick side hug before allowing him to get into his seat. Izuku smiled at the sign of affection and slid in next to Tenya. The kids began discussing their plans for the day, lunch and tea at Momo's before going to the arcade for a few hours. They planned on finishing their day at Mr. Kobayashi's cafe for sweet treats before heading home. It was important to fit in as much as possible, as Shoto wouldn't be able to hang out again for a while. The ride over was loud and chaotic, with Isamu blasting American country music and half the group singing along while the other half complained. Himiko was buzzing in her seat, excited to hang out with her friends after completing her quirk training. Izuku had noticed a positive change in her, and she had told them all about how in control she felt over her quirk. She had blossomed so much since joining the family, and Izuku couldn't wait for her to have a great day out with everyone. Momo's house was massive, a grand estate with a large gate and security that walked through the grounds. Isamu confirmed their identities before pulling in and driving up the winding entrance. Momo and her parents stood on the front steps with Shoto at their side, all waving as the van pulled up. Isamu stepped out to introduce himself, exchanging numbers with Momo's parents in case anything came up. Her mother and father introduced themselves to the kids and instructed them to ask if they needed anything at all. "Hello, my name is Momo." The girl smiled brightly at Anase and Himiko, who both introduced themselves energetically. "My name is Shoto. It is nice to meet you both." The boy waved, his shy smile and timid eyes immediately endearing him to everyone in the group. The group followed Momo inside, admiring the furnishings and large rooms as they walked through the home. They were eventually shown into a beautiful sitting room where homemade pizzas and ice cream awaited them. Momo had gathered various card games and board games for them to play while they ate, and they quickly grouped together to start their competitions. Izuku and Tenya began playing chess while the rest of their friends began games of Monopoly and Uno. Their two newest additions blended in easily with the rest of the group, and Izuku was glad they hadn't overwhelmed the shy pair of friends. Shoto was clearly comfortable around Momo, and he seemed to come out of his shell more and more as time went on. He even cracked a small smile as Momo began showing Mei various things she could make with her quirk. Over the next few hours, they all got to know each other a bit better, taking turns playing various games and laughing at the antics of their more hyper friends, specifically Anase, Mei, and Himiko. Momo brought out a few of her favorite teas after they had finished lunch, and she was ecstatic to find that Izuku had ample knowledge on the topic. Netsu would really enjoy talking to her, Izuku thought to himself, and he made a mental note to schedule an afternoon tea for the three of them. Once they were finished with their tea, it was time for the arcade, an adventure all of the children were especially excited for. "Our car is waiting out front," Momo explained as she joined the group in stacking plates and cleaning up the room. Izuku was pleased to see that she was raised to clean up after herself even though the house was fully staffed. They followed her through the home and back towards the front door, all of their jaws dropping when they saw a full limousine waiting for them. "The limo," Himiko cheered loudly, running towards the car with a large smile on her face. Nice." Hitoshi grinned as he walked down the steps and nodded his head at the driver holding the door open for them. Izuku opened and closed his mouth a few times before turning towards the girl with a beaming smile. "You didn't have to go through all of this trouble," he commented, though his voice was filled with joy. Momo blushed and rubbed the back of her neck in embarrassment, though she was clearly pleased by everyone's praise. "I was a bit overexcited. I've never had a group of friends come over to my home." She wouldn't meet his eyes, and she was rubbing her hands together self-consciously at the admission. "It's perfect," Mei exclaimed, practically hopping on Momo's back as she went to hug the girl. Momo relaxed a bit at the sign of affection, following the pink-haired girl down to the waiting car. On the ride over, they all fell into their own conversations, all of them buzzing with excitement as they got closer to their destination. Shoto and Anase looked over Hitoshi's shoulders as he showed them pictures of his cats on his phone. He was happy Anase and their newest friend were able to bond so quickly over their mutual dislike of the number 2 hero. The ride to the arcade was short, and before they knew it they pulled into the downtown area and waited for the driver to come around to let them out. The man was clearly amused by their excitement towards his actions, and graciously accepted the cash tip that each of the children provided him. Himiko, Shoto, and Momo all eyed the building cautiously, none of them having experienced the arcade before. The other children had promised to take it easy on them and show them the ropes, something that was rare for the competitive members of the group. There were just enough people to make the arcade feel full without being overwhelming. and after they collected their tokens they discussed their action plan. After deciding on a buddy system they began to fan out. Though they stayed in the same areas as they worked their way through the games. Momo seemed especially fond of games that involved some type of strategy, her mind easily excelling at Connect 4 basketball. Himiko enjoyed throwing things, her natural aim making her a strong competitor for anything that involved hitting a target. Shoto seemed to excel at the fighting games, his battle strategies only improving after every round. Many members of the group found themselves watching the trio play, admiring the fascination in their eyes. These games had been something they had taken for granted, but it was a joy to see their friends discovering them for the first time. It was during a particularly intense air hockey battle between Mei and Tenya that things started to get really competitive. Shoto stood next to Izuku with a concentrated expression, and his next words made the green-haired boy grin. "I would like to challenge you," Shoto said suddenly, his eyes focused on the game in front of him as if he were trying to memorize each movement. Izuku kept his eyes ahead as he thought the offer over. "Are you sure?" he asked. The question came from a mixture of cockiness and concern. He truly didn't want to scare the boy away so early in their friendship. It was just that he was rather competitive, especially when someone challenged him outright. "I am absolutely sure," Shoto replied, and Izuku could have sworn he saw a small grin flash on the boy's face. They waited their turn, watching as Mei slowly took the lead and eventually came out on top. Tenya shook her hand, though he was clearly irritated by his loss. Shoto and Izuku made their way to opposite ends of the table, eyeing each other down as Hitoshi put a few coins into the slot. "All right, no funny business." Hitoshi crossed his arms in front of them as he stared them both down. Izuku had to admit that the boy had begun to master his father's teacher look, and he knew that information would please his friend. He would have to bring it up the next time they were all training together. He focused himself back on the task at hand, his body already buzzing with adrenaline as the table came to life. "Do not go easy on me just because we are friends," Shoto requested, and Izuku nodded his agreement. He squatted down a bit, his arm bent and waiting for the puck to be dropped. Hitoshi raised it in the air dramatically, his eyes darting between the two of them as he counted down from 3, 2, 1, go. Hitoshi dropped the puck, causing the competitors to jump to life as they fought for the first upper hand. The disc slid to Izuku's side first, allowing him to set a brutal momentum that he could tell Shoto was already struggling to keep up with. The boy's bicolored eyes jumped around the table, trying to predict Izuku's next move while guarding his goal. Izuku did everything he could to ensure that Shoto would not be able to take control of the game, whether it was through corner shots or slowing down the speed of the puck randomly. He stayed quiet even when he scored his first goal, remembering the many lessons his mentors had taught him about gloating too soon. Something about Shoto made him hard to underestimate. Eventually, the boy began to catch on to the strategy of the game, gaining a bit of speed on the puck and scoring a goal. They went back and forth, each scoring points until they were stuck in a tie. Izuku kept his eyes on the puck, his heart hammering in his chest as they fought for the win. Shoto sent him a brutal shot, and he scrambled to redirect it away from his side of the table. He moved his wrist a fraction too soon, and he watched in slow motion as the puck drifted into his goal with a smooth click. His eyes stayed glued to the goal for a few moments before he looked up to find Shoto grinning at him in satisfaction. "I win," the boy said flatly, quickly gaining control of his expression by coughing into his hand. "He beat Izuku," Himiko exclaimed, and everyone slowly realized what had just happened. The group began to cheer, patting Shoto on the back and congratulating him on the rare win against the green-haired menace. Izuku grinned and shook his hand, grateful for the challenge. "Thank you for playing against me," Shoto spoke quietly once everyone had calmed down and gone back to their own games. "Anytime," Izuku smiled, though he was a bit sad that they would not be able to do this whenever they wanted. He would make sure that this day would remain special, though. The group eventually ended up at the rows of claw machines, all of them eyeing various stuffed animals and prizes that were just within their reach. There was a Silver Age All Might plushie that seemed to grab everyone's attention, though each of their attempts to get the stuffed toy failed. Izuku found himself analyzing the machine, trying to figure out the best way to get the prize into his hands. After watching a few of his friends attempt to win against the claw, he came to the frustrating realization that it was all based on luck. Shoto kept his eyes glued to the machine as their friends played, and Izuku wished he could get the stuffed animal for his friend. It quickly became clear that he was not the only one that had noticed their friend's interest. Inasa stepped up to the machine with a determined glare, his eyes scanning across the pile of stuffed animals as he came up with a strategy. He carefully maneuvered the stick and waited a few seconds before hitting the button. They all watched with intense focus as the claw slowly dropped and wrapped itself around one of All Might's legs. The group held their breath, not daring to move a muscle as the plushie made its way closer to the drop point and into their arms. Once it was safely deposited into the drop box, they all cheered, jumping up and down at Inasa's victory. The tall boy carefully pulled the stuffed All Might out of the machine, clutching it to his chest for a few moments before looking towards Shoto. Here, it's yours. Hinasa reached out and placed it into Shoto's hands. The bi-colored boy stared at the plushie for a few long moments before looking back up at their friend with sparkling eyes. For me, he asked, both in awe and confusion. I saw you looking at it, and I still feel bad for reacting coldly towards you when we were first introduced. Hinasa scratched the back of his neck awkwardly, but his earnest words made everyone smile. My father will hate it. Shoto grinned, making everyone in the group cackle with delight. The kids ended up giving away their tickets to a kid in a Snipe t-shirt, all of them feeling altruistic after Inasa's kind gesture. Mr. Kobayashi's cafe was only a short train ride away, and the walk to the station allowed them to explore a little bit more of the downtown area. Izuku was looking forward to seeing the man, and he couldn't wait to introduce him to his new friends. Shoto and Momo were looking forward to riding the train for the first time, while the rest of the group was looking forward to a few sweet treats from the cafe. They passed by groups of young people as they headed to the station. Everyone seemed to be enjoying a day away from school and responsibility. The sidewalk was fairly crowded, and they had to make an effort to stay together as a group as they weaved their way through the crowd. Izuku was chatting with Himiko and Mei when a hand suddenly shot out to grab his wrist. He turned to find Tenya staring across the street with a serious expression. His body immediately began to move when he saw what his friend was staring at. Across the street there was a group of boys surrounding someone in an alley, their taunts barely audible from where he was standing. They were pushing and shoving their victim, and Izuku's blood boiled as he dodged cars and pedestrians to get to them. Hey, what do you think you're doing? He yelled, pushing the boy closest to him and putting himself between the victim and bullies. There was a ripped plastic bag at their feet, its contents scattered across the ground intentionally. Midoriya, a voice questioned from behind him, and he turned slightly to find Kirishima staring up at him. Before he was able to respond, his friends joined them in the alley. What is going on, Izuku? Hitoshi asked, immediately standing to Izuku's right side with his arms crossed. The rest of his friends followed suit, creating a wall between Kirishima and his tormentors. Who the hell are you? One of the boys asked, his fake confidence barely concealing the fear in his voice. Izuku stared the boy down, mustering up a glare that would make Uncle Sho very proud. I'm Kirishima's friend, he replied, turning to give the black-haired a small grin as Momo helped him up off the ground. Kirishima was looking between Izuku and the bullies in shock, clearly not expecting this turn of events. This loser doesn't have any friends, one of the bullies sneered, though he stepped back a bit when Hitoshi practically snarled at him. I'm his friend too, the purple-haired boy replied with a growl. So am I, Shoto added with a smooth tone. Me too, I love red. Himiko jumped up and down as she stared at Kirishima's eyes. I'm his friend too, Mei added, wrapping an arm around the nervous boy's shoulders. Each of his friends began stepping up, stating that they were friends with this boy they had only just met. Izuku noted that they outnumbered the bullies by 3, and he really liked their odds against these guys if things got hairy. In a surprising show of self-preservation, the group of boys waved them off and left. The fear in their eyes filled Izuku with a sick satisfaction, and he turned to properly greet Kirishima. Hey, I'm happy we ran into each other again, Izuku said with a cheerful smile. I wish it was under better circumstances, but what can you do? He shrugged, giving his friend a few moments to mentally process what just happened. Thank you, you guys really didn't have to do that, Kirishima responded with a small smile, and the group began introducing themselves to the red-eyed boy. They were all unsurprised by the circumstances of their first meeting, as Izuku had a habit of making friends wherever he went. They chatted for a while before he turned to the ripped plastic bag on the ground. The cans seemed to be all right, but the bag was not usable. I'm sorry, I have to get this back to my mom, he explained as he began stuffing cans in his pockets and stacking them in his arms. Hitoshi nudged Izuku's shoulder, giving him silent permission to offer what was on his mind. Kirishima, why don't we help you with those? Izuku reached out and began alleviating some of the burden from his friend. The rest of the kids helped carry the cans, chatting with Kirishima as though he had been a part of the group the entire time. His moms invited the kids inside to thank them, and they were clearly pleased that their son had made a few new friends. Kirishima ended up joining them at Mr. Kobayashi's cafe, melding into the group naturally. They all spent the rest of the day eating treats and getting to know each other, their smiles never leaving their faces. Katsuki's hands began to sweat as he approached the building, his nerves finally getting the best of him after days of preparing. The sounds of children's laughter began filling the air as he passed various play areas, while teenagers played basketball with their friends. People were gardening, talking with friends, and walking the grounds while enjoying the beautiful weather. He pulled out his phone to check his email, looking over his shift confirmation multiple times before gulping. Thank you for volunteering with the Musutafu Center for Quirk Equality. He reminded himself that he genuinely wanted to do this, and not only because it might give him further insight into Deku's life and family, It was important for him to prove to himself that he was becoming better, that he would be a hero for everyone. Once he was 20 feet from the front door, he paused, staring up at the building as his heart hammered in his chest. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, time melting away as he fought to calm his nerves. If you keep staring up at the building like that, someone is going to call the cops. A nasally voice spoke from behind him. Katsuki scoffed and turned to find a blonde boy with bright blue eyes and an annoying smirk looking at him. "I'm here to volunteer, not blow the place up," Katsuki replied with an annoyed tone, already turning to walk away. "Oh, I'm volunteering too." The blonde ran up and matched his stride with Katsuki's. "Good for you," he replied, trying his best to remain cordial. He was doing better, but it was still difficult to hide his disdain for other humans sometimes. "I'm Nito Monoma, by the way," the blonde said with a smile, sticking his hand out to shake. Katsuki took a deep breath and wiped his hand on his pants before gripping the other boy's hand. "Katsuki Bakugo." Monoma seemed pleased with the introduction, making small talk as they tried to find the person they were supposed to report to. Eventually, they asked the woman at the front desk, who graciously helped them find the gym. They were assigned 2 large bins of sports balls to reinflate, a job that was easy but a bit tedious. Katsuki found himself getting less annoyed the more he talked with Monoma. The other blonde's quirks seemed to get more interesting the more he explained it. "I'll become a hero even if no one thinks I can," Monoma insisted at one point, the determination in his eyes reminding Katsuki of a certain freckled nerd. When they were finished, they checked in with the supervisor and were sent home for the day. Monoma asked Katsuki for his number to keep in touch, and he surprised himself by giving it to him. He didn't even feel the urge to blow the other boy up when he called Katsuki a grandpa for having an 8 p.m. bedtime. Perhaps he could do this whole friends thing, after all. "Isamu, our boy seems to have adopted another kid. Inko, are you really surprised at this point?" "Isamu, not one bit." Dabi threw his keys into the bowl by the door before kicking off his shoes, the familiar scent of his shared apartment with Keigo immediately putting him at ease. Patrol had been long, and his body was aching from the various fights and rescues he had to perform. It had all culminated in a little girl screaming and crying when she had seen his face after he had pulled her from a pile of debris. Her mother had apologized profusely, but her words of appreciation didn't push away the emotional sting. He took his time in the shower, scrubbing away the dust and grime that had accumulated throughout the day. Steam filtered out into the rest of the room, sticking onto the tiles and filling the space with haze. It was only when his skin began to wrinkle that he finally stepped out from his brief reprieve, drying himself off in the humid air as he tried to organize his thoughts. He swiped a hand over the large mirror in their bathroom, taking a few moments to look over his reflection. His body was a patchwork of pink raised burns and pale flesh, markings that were a constant reminder of his past. Green hair clinged onto his neck and forehead, a physical reminder of the family he had found along the way. Dabi's body was a contradiction, a fusion of pain and love that made him feel out of sorts in a way he could never put into words. In a world filled with quirks, was he truly so horrifying to look at? He slowly got dressed and began making dinner, impatiently awaiting the arrival of his boyfriend. Keigo's mere presence seemed to brighten his mood, and he found comfort in their shared childhood experiences. Those golden eyes always saw right through him, making him feel truly seen. His boyfriend was constantly complimenting him, always making an effort to show his love through both words and actions. Why couldn't he believe him? He picked up his phone and began scrolling through various social media, trying his best to ignore the thoughts swirling in his mind. Pictures of his family and a few of his hero friends filled his feed, giving him a welcome distraction from his drifting thoughts. A silly picture of Izuku and his friends made him smile, and he immediately hearted the image before continuing his scroll. His eyes drifted to his notifications tab when a little red bubble popped up, joined quickly by a dozen or so new notifications before his phone began buzzing out of control. A lump formed in his throat, dread overtaking him as he shakily clicked on the bubble. The first thing that caught his eye was a picture of the little girl running away from him, and his stomach dropped when he began to see the comment he was being mentioned in. At Azure, Def didn't deserve to be Rookie of the Year. No one wants to see that face after being rescued. I Def think at Azure is a great hero, but couldn't they have given him a mask or something to wear? I don't see how at Hawk's official is with someone like him. I guess it's like some type of charity thing. Adopt the quirkless kid and his freaky-looking brother. Whoa, a hand reached out and plucked his phone out of his hands, and he could vaguely hear someone calling out to him through the ringing in his ears. "Babe, please look at me." Keigo's voice finally cut through the haze, and Dabi briefly acknowledged the tears pouring down his own cheeks. He looked into those kind golden eyes, so filled with love and concern that it made his heart ache with guilt and gratitude. His boyfriend lifted him into his arms and carried him over to the couch, kissing all over his face as he wiped away the tears. "You're so beautiful. Please never listen to those idiots." Keigo kissed his forehead and continued whispering sweet affirmations into his ear until his breathing finally stabilized. They ate dinner together on the couch, cuddled up as they watched a mindless reality show they both enjoyed. His mind was still buzzing from the past few hours, but the calming presence of his partner made him feel a bit more secure. After they had cleaned up the dishes, he noticed Keigo eyeing him, clearly wanting to ask him something. Dabi gestured for him to say what he needed to say, immediately leaning into the blonde's arms when he reached out for him. "How are you feeling?" Those golden eyes peered at him, filling him with a range of emotions as he inventoried his feelings. "I wish those types of comments didn't affect me as much," he admitted, his head tucked into Keigo's chest. Dabi felt vulnerable and exposed, but also comforted as he breathed in the familiar scent of the man he loved. It is normal to feel bad when people are saying horrible things about you. Being in the public eye like this can be really overwhelming. Keigo kissed his cheek and squeezed him tighter. They got ready for bed together and cuddled up, and Dabi spent his last few moments of consciousness thinking about how he needed to build up his self-esteem. He had been through far too much to allow anyone to keep him from achieving his dreams. The next morning, he stepped into Rumi's agency ready to work and distract himself from the night before. "Azure, there is someone waiting in your office for you," the receptionist greeted as he walked past her desk. He nodded, fully expecting Izuku or another member of his family as he made his way down the hall. It wasn't abnormal for them to visit and check in, or for his little brother to drop by with a new support item or combat idea. He was surprised to find a large figure sitting in the desk chair in front of his desk. Gang Orca, the number 10 hero, turned to greet him with a kind sparkle in his eyes. Dabi had gotten used to being around the top 10 heroes in his family, and he was even dating one of the most popular heroes in the country. But deep down, he was still a bit of a hero fanboy. Hello. He internally slapped himself for the awkward introduction, stepping into his office with a fake air of confidence as he tried to find his bearings. The hero eyed him curiously as he sat in his desk chair, clearly unsure of how to proceed. "Would you like something to drink?" He tried not to sigh when Gang Orca declined the offer. "I'm not planning on taking up too much of your time, kid," the hero added, but his assurance only led to more confusion on Dabi's part. Was this for a case? It wasn't unusual for certain heroes to work together on difficult cases, but he wasn't sure why a top hero would be seeking the help of a rookie. Seeming to sense Dabi's confusion, the hero revealed the true nature of his visit. "I saw the tweets yesterday," he explained, his tone steady and careful as he waited for the younger hero's reaction. Dabi stiffened in his seat, his palms feeling warm and clammy as he tried to figure out the best way to respond to that statement. Something about Gang Orca made him seem trustworthy, so he decided to go for the truth. "I really wish I didn't have to think about them anymore," he admitted, his eyes drifting around the room. Gang Orca slid a folder across the desk, gesturing for Dabi to open it. The first piece of paper made a lump form in his throat, and it only got worse as he read through various headlines and tweets about the hero in front of him. Hero or villain? Should mutants be heroes? Bro, if Gang Orca ever came to rescue me, I might just go with the villain tbh. The last piece of paper showed the latest announcement that Gang Orca had been named in the top 3 for heroes that resembled villains. Dabi's stomach was tight with a mixture of rage and understanding, and he suddenly realized why the man had come to visit him. A sense of kinship had formed between them as he read through the file, a feeling of understanding passing over them. "Just remember that you are not alone, and you have a support system even outside of your family." The man stood, staring into Dabi's eyes for a moment before turning to leave. "My door is always open. You'll find my contact information in the folder as well." Dabi mumbled out a thank you and tried his best not to cry as he watched the hero walk down the hallway. He took a moment to save Orca's information into his phone before getting ready for his patrol. "You better not be thinking about joining another agency." He looked up to find Rumi glaring at him, her brow raised as she eyed the folder on his desk. Her grin told him she was only joking, but he didn't comment on it. After flipping her off, he made his way towards the door of his office, only stopping when he felt her tug on his uniform. Her eyes were somber and serious, a look that was rare for the normally energetic hero. "I don't say this enough, but you deserve to be a hero more than most of the assholes with hero licenses." She made her way down the hall before he could respond, leaving Dabi to stand frozen in the doorway for a moment before he began to follow her. He felt light and couldn't hide his excitement for the day ahead. Perhaps he had needed the reminder, after all. Izuku tightened his tactical boots and gave himself one last look over in the mirror. He was wearing all black, the gear he usually wore when he did his nighttime training with Uncle Sho. Mei, Hitoshi, and Tenya were fixing up their own tactical suits beside him. Once they were ready, he prepared himself to give one last debrief before they headed out on their mission. This might be one of the most important missions we ever go on. He puffed out his chest, looking over his friends with a serious expression. You cannot use your quirks under any circumstances, and we must keep support gear used to a minimum. These are not our normal targets. They will be able to spot us the moment we slip up. He finished, satisfied when his friends nodded in understanding. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a signal from Dabi that their targets were on the move. They made their way downstairs, only stopping when Sho stepped in front of them with his arms crossed. For a brief moment he thought his uncle was going to stop them, but instead the man shook his head before giving them one last word of advice. If you get caught, you won't have any backup. None of us want to deal with the consequences. They all shivered at the thought, but they had already gotten this far. A white car pulled up in front of the house, and Rumi greeted them with a few snacks for the drive downtown. They spent the ride reviewing their data and plan of action, not wanting to make any slip-ups. Try your best not to get caught, gremlins. She waved as she pulled away, dropping them off a few blocks away from their targets. They made their way up to a nearby rooftop, with Hitoshi and Izuku assisting their friends with the ascent. Once they found a good spot, they began setting up their gear, pointing their sensors towards the restaurant down below. It looks like they have already been seated, May commented, her eyes covered with a pair of goggles that connected with the sensors. Target S is passing a bouquet of flowers over to Target M, she added a moment later. That's the bare minimum, at least. Tenya snorted, his eyes completely focused on the screen in front of them. The next hour was spent trying their best to listen in on their target's conversation, though they kept experiencing technical difficulties. After 10 minutes of static, May finally perked back up. Targets on the move, she exclaimed, quickly helping to pack up their gear before they hopped over a nearby rooftop. They stayed 2 blocks back from their targets, following them through the downtown area from the top of the building. It was only when they reached the older part of the city that they made their way down to street level, unable to reach the low rooftops of the building. They cursed when they seemed to lose their targets, spending the next 30 minutes or so messing with her laptop in a grimy alleyway they chose to hide away in. Izuku was about to call it, but suddenly the screen lit up with their location. It seems they are going for dessert, Hitoshi commented as they finally found the ice cream shop their targets were walking into. They could see them through the windows, chatting with the cashier as they ordered their treats. Target M picked up her phone and dialed a number, and Izuku froze when his phone began ringing in his pocket. He leapt back in the alley, praying that the background noise would be blocked by putting his hand over the speaker. Hey, Mom, everything okay? He tried to sound cheerful and casual, not wanting to blow their cover after all they had gone through that night. Yes, dear. Isamu and I wanted to see if you and the other children would like to join us for ice cream. She sounded amused, and when he stepped out of the alley he saw his mother waving at him from the window of the ice cream shop. Looks like the mission failed, Tenya deadpanned, causing his friends to flinch. At least they all got ice cream out of the ordeal. Mamadoriya Protection Squad. Sniped Yeehaw, what is this? Nedzu Rat God, we just wanted to remind you how dear Inko is to all of us. Aizawa Uncle Sleepy, yes, and it would be a problem if anyone were to hurt her. Sniped Yeehaw, why would I hurt Inko? You all know how much I adore her. Midnight and Y Quill. And as long as you keep that attitude, we will not have any problems. Keigo Chicken, that woman only deserves the best. Please make sure she gets it. Mike Uncle Loud, some people would be very upset if anyone did anything to hurt her. Rumi Rabbit, people that have quirks that can break bones. Tensei Zoom Zoom, I will only accept the best for Auntie. Best genus denim for Lif, everyone. Let's not be too hasty with threats. Snipe Yeehaw, thank you, genus. Best genus denim for Lif. Isamu knows what would happen if he hurt our beloved Inko. Sukachi the man in the yellow hat, as an officer I have to look away, but as someone who loves Inko I must share the same sentiment. His joke Ronald McDonald, remember that laughter can become painful after a while, D. Vlad King Dracula, I haven't known Inko for a long time, but I have to agree with everyone. Power Loader Mole Man, I have a few things in my workshop that I wouldn't mind testing out, if anything were to happen. Snipe Yeehaw, I would never do anything to her. She is the most amazing woman I know. Dabi My Chemical Romance Reject, let's keep it that way. His body hit the mat as the air was knocked out of him, but he couldn't help the grin that crossed his face as he jumped up to his feet. Once he was upright he couldn't help but reach for the pocket-sized notebook he always carried with him. Your quirk is amazing, Izuku proclaimed before jotting down his racing thoughts, a quiet mutter filling the space around him as he filled a few pages with his thoughts. Thanks. He looked up to find his sparring partner staring at the ground, his eyes darting towards the corners of the gym as he avoided eye contact. The older boy in front of him had an amazing quirk, but seemed to lack the confidence that would normally come with it. Nedzu had approached him with the idea of training with a few second years, and he immediately jumped on the opportunity. Mirio, Nejire, and Amajiki were considered the next big three at UA, a fact that Izuku immediately fixated on. Mirio's quirk was adaptable and powerful, especially with the way he had adapted it to combat. Nejire's quirk offered so many possibilities. Her aerial combat skills and support capabilities were endless. Amachiki's quirk was the most intriguing to Izuku due to its never-ending potential. Mirio had been partnered with Hitoshi and Tenya to help with speed and adaptability during combat. Nejire was teaching Inasa aerial combat, maneuverability, and long-range attacks. Amachiki had been paired with Izuku to help him work on analyzing unpredictable quirks during combat. The recommendation exam was only getting closer, and they wanted to push themselves to reach top scores. Their mentors all agreed it would be beneficial to get to know their future upperclassmen, while also getting the challenge of fighting people with unfamiliar quirks. Amachiki seemed extremely timid, but Izuku couldn't help but notice the love between the three friends. It reminded him so much of his own friend group, and it made him even more intrigued by the trio. Mirio and Nejire brought out something special from the shy boy, and it seemed his quiet encouragement helped to push them to greater heights. He went to grab his water bottle as Mirio continued sparring against his friends, his bright smile growing even wider every time he knocked one of the boys down. Izuku couldn't help but think that he would make an amazing hero one day. While he had once dreamed of being the #1 hero, he knew that it just wasn't in the cards for him. His new goal was to be a hero that helped people, no matter who they were or where they came from. The work they did with the center showed him how truly unequal their society was, even after years of experiencing quirk discrimination. Where would Himiko be if they hadn't found her in time? Where would Dabi be? He wanted to reach a hand out to those that needed it, even if it wasn't in the spotlight. A part of him that still held onto his childhood obsession with All Might wanted him to be a hero with a smile, someone that came to the rescue of those that were normally overlooked. Would All Might tell him that quirkless people could be heroes? Would the hero's opinion even matter to him? Izuku wanted to build community, to show people that no matter their quirk or their past they could be heroes in their own way. What he lacked in power, he more than made up for in determination and support. "Hey guys, wanna finish training with a bang?" Nejire called, her face morphing into a feral smile as she looked over the group of middle schoolers. Inasa was jumping up and down like an excited puppy, while Hitoshi and Tenya looked like they were ready to drop to the floor at any given moment. "Sure," Izuku agreed cautiously, the girl's smile reminding him of Rumi. The rest of the training was spent in a battle royal, leading to the younger teens on their asses as the older students gave them tips on how to improve. It was a nice challenge, and it made him even more excited for his potential future at UA. Mirio approached him as he was packing up his things. The rest of their friends were scattered across the gym attempting to cool down after their long training. Izuku eyed him cautiously, though he knew deep down that the boy had no ill intentions. "You have a lot of potential, you know," Mirio commented casually, his eyes watching out for Izuku's reaction. The younger boy blushed and quietly thanked him, the sudden praise taking him by surprise. He knew he had worked hard over the years, but it was nice to hear from someone outside of the family. They stood side by side for a few moments, both taking in the antics of their friends as they slowly began to regain their energy. A sudden thought struck Izuku, a question he had yet to ask the older boy. "Mirio?" He tried to keep his voice calm as he heard the other boy hum in acknowledgement. Izuku steeled his nerves, standing up tall as he turned to face the blonde. "Do you think quirkless people can be heroes?" Bright blue eyes widened before a wave of understanding washed over them as Mirio's face morphed into a small smile. "Absolutely." The answer was filled with genuine belief, and Izuku felt his nerves immediately melt. Mirio seemed to be thinking of something, and he eyed Izuku carefully for a few seconds before he seemed to come to a decision in his mind. "My mentor's quirk isn't even combative, but he is still an amazing hero," the boy commented, taking a short pause before continuing. "Sir would probably love you. I should set up a meeting between the two of you sometime soon." Izuku's face scrunched up in confusion, his mind racing to remember who Mirio was interning under. "Sir?" he finally questioned, his mental search coming up blank. "I work with Sir Night-Eye." Mirio pumped his chest up in pride, and Izuku's jaw dropped. "Sir Night-Eye, All Might's old sidekick. His quirk is so amazing." He stopped his thoughts before he got ahead of himself, and he looked up at his new friend with a bright smile. "I'd love to meet him." The two teens exchanged numbers as the rest of their friends began joining them towards the entrance of the gym. Nejire and Inasa were energetically discussing their favorite moves, while Tenya and Hitoshi looked on with fond smiles. Amachiki seemed to glue himself to Mirio's side, though he did whisper a thank you to Izuku before asking for a copy of his notes. He promised to send him a copy, but he would have Nezu look them over before he shared them. The principal always seemed to have an extra insight, and he wanted his new sparring partner to have the best of the best. They had all fallen into their own conversations before Nejire began jumping up and down with excitement. "I just had an idea. We should all get ice cream." Her smile was infectious, the rest of the group readily agreeing to her proposal. Their training had been long and productive. They deserved a sweet treat for their work. They made their way out to the hall as Izuku texted the family group chat to let them know where they were headed. I just need to grab a few things from the teacher's lounge. I'll meet you guys up front. Izuku waved at his friends to continue without him as they made their way towards the entrance. The group had agreed to go to Mr. Kobayashi's cafe, and he was excited to introduce his new friends to one of his favorite people. As he approached the lounge, he heard a mixture of voices, and he immediately began to smile at the thought of seeing more of his favorite people. Nedzu, Uncle Sho, Isamu, Uncle Mike, Auntie Nim, and Vlad were scattered around the room holding separate conversations. All of the adults turned to him with smiles as he stepped into the room. Izuku, how was training, sweetheart? Nimiri pulled him into a tight hug before ruffling his hair. He gave them a brief summary of training, all of them listening attentively as he discussed his thoughts on the trio's quirks. Oh, Mirio wants me to meet Sir Night-Eye, but I told him I would ask you all first. Uncle Sho's eyes widened for a moment before he began to nod, and the rest of the group seemed to have similar reactions. He knew most of them had worked with the hero before, and he trusted their opinions on the man. I think that is a great idea. He would have a lot to teach you regarding analysis and casework, Uncle Sho commented, and the rest of the group nodded their heads. I have a great amount of respect for Night-Eye. I think he would be a great addition to your mentorship team. Nenzu agreed. Izuku smiled, knowing that they all had his best interest at heart made him feel unstoppable. He grabbed his bag and said his goodbyes, turning towards the door before Uncle Sho called out his name. One last thing. Fat Gum agreed to meet with Momo to discuss her quirk and give her some tips. That's amazing. I'll let her know. Izuku said his final goodbyes and pulled out his phone to text his friend. He knew that the hero would have a lot to teach the girl, and that he could help her with her overall confidence. As he stepped out of the building and saw his friends waiting for him by the front gates, he couldn't help but be excited for the future. Katsuki finished marking up the math sheet he was reviewing, trying his best to ignore the hopeful eyes of the young girl staring up at him expectantly. He felt a strange sense of pride seeing that she had gotten most of the questions right, including a rather challenging problem she had struggled with before. Good job. His words sounded strangled as he tried his best to be genuine, and the child lit up at his praise. Thank you, Bakugo. The girl cheered, launching forward and hugging him before running off back to her study group. He hated to admit it, but he actually enjoyed the time he spent at the center tutoring younger kids. Watching them figure out the problems and grow made him feel accomplished in a way he had never expected. Monoma was a few tables away, helping with literature and history homework. They had struck up an unlikely friendship, even going over to each other's houses after volunteering some days. It was new to him, someone so willing to call him out on his bullshit and yet still accepted him for where he was at. It made him think of Izuku and those fiery green eyes, his look of determination and pride. The work he had done at the center made him feel grounded and accomplished, and he had started to spend most of his free time there. He had been working on becoming a better person ever since Aldera had shut down, the experience having been both traumatizing and eye-opening. He and his parents had a meeting at UA later that day, one that would determine his ability to take the entrance exam and attempt to join the hero program of his dreams. The two boys wrapped up for the day, checking out with their supervisor and heading to their lockers to grab their things. Although he was tired, he was entertaining the idea of inviting Monoma over to play video games for a few hours. His mother kept badgering him about hanging out with people his own age during the weekends, and she seemed to like his new friend. They began walking towards the front entrance as he readied himself to invite the other blonde over, but a familiar voice knocked the wind out of him before he could speak. Let me just check on a few things and then we can head to the arcade. His eyes immediately locked in on a familiar head of curly green hair, his heart plummeting to his stomach as he began to panic. Monoma must have been talking to him, as he received a playful push that almost knocked him out of his shock. The other boy was tapping him, his voice growing more concerned by the second. Katsuki grabbed him and pulled them both behind some plants nearby, his head barely peeking out from the side of the leaves. His eyes couldn't leave Izuku, watching his every move as he talked to his friends. He recognized a few of them from passing by the old cafe, but there were a few new additions to the group. A blonde girl with a bright smile, a boy with sharp teeth, and a girl with black hair pulled into a high ponytail were following them around. Izuku looked happy and healthy, unlike the boy who had been locked on the roof of their middle school. A strange wave of jealousy and other emotions washed over him as he watched them laugh and walk together. He stared until they disappeared behind a set of staff doors, finally freeing him from the purgatory of shock and discomfort he had been catapulted into. Are you okay? Katsuki had forgotten he had a guest to his misery, and he turned to the other boy with wide eyes. We need to go somewhere else, he muttered before grabbing Monoma's sleeve and pulling him out of the building. Neither boy spoke, the sounds of children playing the only noise following them as Katsuki led them to the tree line. He took the familiar path, one that was ingrained in him since childhood. It wasn't until they were nearing their destination that he finally let go of his friend's sleeve. If you're going to murder me, you should at least be a little less obvious. Monoma snarked, but his eyes still shined with concern. Katsuki stared out in front of him, watching the flow of the stream that had haunted his dreams in the past few years. I used to know a kid named Izuku. We'd come here all the time as kids. He took a deep breath before turning to his new friend, secretly hoping this wouldn't ruin the tentative friendship they had been building. As he sat, he began to tell his story and the regrets that he still carried. Nezu was more forgiving than most people gave him credit for, especially when it came to children. He had dealt with the so-called teachers that had abused his nephew and other children at Aldera, but dealing with the children had been a completely different matter. They could not go unpunished for what they had done, but he also wanted to guide them to a better path. He seemed to have picked up that habit from Izuku. Shota was sitting at his side, his eyes flicking through the file Nezu had prepared for him. They knew that the Bakugo boy had helped them find Izuku during the incident a year ago, but they could not have ignored his past actions completely. He needed a guiding hand to get him back on track to achieve his dreams, and it seemed that their efforts had been fruitful. The boy had completed all of his mandated therapy, and had even continued attending sessions after his required period. He had been secretly volunteering at the center, doing his best to keep his head down and do meaningful work for the community. It seemed he was doing his best to become the hero he wanted to be, but that didn't mean Nezu would go easy on him. He clicked the button on his desk to open the office door as the Bakugos approached, all three members greeting them formally before taking their seats. Shota closed the file and looked up at the trio in front of them, his eyes yet calculating. It seems you have met all of the requirements we had laid out for you, even exceeding them in some places. His tone held no emotion, simply stating the facts as they were. They began to ask him about his hobbies, his schoolwork, and a broad range of other topics to get an idea of his growth over the past year. He answered every question they threw at him, his parents sitting by his side in support of their son. There was one last question on Nezu's mind, but Shota beat him to it. Why have you been volunteering at the Musutafu Center? Bakugo froze, his skin paling as he looked between the two adults with widened eyes. Interesting. It seemed as though the boy thought he would be in trouble, as though it were a secret that he had been teaching children math and assisting with the sports clubs. So it wasn't for brownie points. Nezu eyed the boy with a newfound interest, his view of the child shifting as they awaited his response. I don't have to stop volunteering, right? The boy's words were filled with panic as he sat forward in his chair. I promise I don't bother anyone. And the kids have a few big tests coming up soon. He looked between Shota and Nezu with pleading eyes, his words taking them both aback. Shota recovered first, his face morphing back into the cool mask of an underground hero. We're not going to stop you, kid. The rest of the meeting passed without incident, and soon they were giving the boy the stamp of approval to take the UA entrance exam. Bakugo stood and bowed with his parents, thanking them once again for helping their boy. Nezu watched the child leave his office, his mind racing with endless possibilities. The future was quite interesting, indeed. Nezu, we met with the Bakugos today. I think you will be interested in hearing about it. In Midoriya, I'll be over for tea after my next meeting. F equals ma. F is the force on a particle of mass and is the resulting acceleration. Hamiltonian operator. Knock knock, either squirt. Izuku felt 2 taps on the top of his head, breaking him out of the research he had been doing. He looked up to find Dabi staring down at him with an amused smile before his older brother squinted at the screen. Time-dependent Schrödinger equation. He read off the page, and Izuku nodded with a small smile. Physics and quirk analysis went hand in hand, and he was always trying to expand his knowledge and understanding of the field. He hadn't been expecting his brother, but he was excited to see them. They had both been busy recently, with training and patrols taking over a majority of their time. Dabi easily caught the young teen as he was practically tackled into a hug, his arms immediately wrapping around his little brother's waist as he spun them around. I'm gonna get dizzy. Izuku giggled as his feet finally hit the floor, both of them taking a moment to right their balance once again. He didn't miss the preoccupied expression on Dabi's face. It was clear that something had him distracted. You okay? He didn't want to push too hard, but he was concerned nonetheless. His brother had seen him at some of his lowest points, and he would always be a shoulder if the favor ever needed to be returned. Dabi had been open with them in so many ways, but he knew there were things his older brother insisted on carrying alone. I'm fine, Zuku. Just a little tired from morning patrol. His smile didn't reach his eyes, but Izuku didn't comment on it. Dabi sat on his bed, taking in the small changes to his little brother's room since he'd moved out. Izuku began to tidy up his desk, putting away the journals and references he had pulled out for his morning research. Mom told me you're going over to the Todorokis' house today. Izuku paused, trying his best to remain relaxed as he thought of a response. His brother's voice was strained, and the smile on his face was clearly forced. Yeah, Shoto invited me over and I'm pretty excited to get to know him better. It felt as though he were traversing a minefield, but he kept himself collected. Dabi had brought up the Todorokis on his own, something that Izuku never expected to happen. This was new territory for him, though he wouldn't shy away from the challenge. He would do anything to help his brother. Izuku sat next to him on the bed, keeping enough distance but wanting to show a silent sign of support. He was surprised when he was pulled into his brother's chest, quickly adapting to the sudden affection. I'm happy you two found each other. Promise me you'll let me know if anything happens. Dabi gave him a small, sad smile. Tell me if my father does anything. He squeezed Dabi tightly, the unspoken truth sitting between them unacknowledged. I will. They sat together for a while, entangled in a hug as they caught each other up on their lives. Izuku promised to visit for dinner and a sleepover soon. Have a good time, let me know how it goes. Dabi gave him one last hug before heading home to Keigo for the day, and Izuku was left alone with his thoughts. He hoped that one day Shoto and Dabi could get to know each other, or that he could find some way to help his brother. The Todoroki home was grand, traditional, and everything you would expect from the home of a top hero. But there was a coldness that permeated from it, filling the street with a sense of stillness that put Izuku on edge. He was surprised when Shoto invited him over, but apparently his father didn't disapprove of their friendship as much as he had let on. Izuku didn't really care about the man's motives. His only goal was to ensure that Shoto had a nice time. The number 2 hero was out of town for a mission for the rest of the day, freeing the boys from the watchful eyes of the Todoroki patriarch. Izuku carefully approached the door and knocked twice. The door opened to reveal a kind-looking woman that greeted him with a polite smile. She introduced herself as Fayumi, Shoto's older sister, as she guided him into the home. There was a sadness in her eyes that Izuku couldn't help but connect to his brother's own weariness. He introduced himself, going through the necessary pleasantries as she showed him to the sitting area. I made tea, but I wasn't sure what you would like for lunch. She gestured for Izuku to take a seat as she remained near the entrance of the room. I can help you make lunch if you'd like, he offered, though Fayumi refused. He thanked her for her hospitality and sat on one of the lounge chairs until Shoto made his appearance. His friend seemed a bit awkward, but it was clear he was excited to have someone over. Hiamomo is the only person I have had over, but those visits were always formal. Shoto meticulously laid out his study supplies as he spoke. Well, I am happy you invited me over. I'll make sure this is the best study day ever. Izuku smiled warmly, and a small smile formed on his friend's face as they settled in to get some work done. Fayumi served them tea, laying out a delicious spread of snacks that made Izuku's mouth water. She stayed to chat for a few minutes, but her demeanor was closed off and tense. The friendly smile on her face didn't quite reach her eyes, though she didn't give off any malice. She asked about the center, and he happily talked about their work and the different initiatives and programs they were running. Many of my students attend programs at the center. They are always excited when they tell me stories about it. Fayumi smiled warmly, her first true smile since he arrived. She told the boys to let her know if they needed anything, and that lunch would be ready in an hour or so. Izuku was pleased that so many people enjoyed the center, and he grinned as he opened up one of his textbooks to begin his studies. They focused for hours, only taking a break for lunch and a few short rests to stretch their legs. Shoto seemed studious and focused, though he didn't seem to take any joy in the process of learning. He was methodical, though it wasn't hard to guess why he seemed so robotic as he worked his way through his math textbook. Everything seemed like a goal, something to accomplish. It would take a lot of work to get his new friend to relax a bit and have fun in the moment. After another hour of studying, Izuku felt the need to splash a bit of cold water on his face to regain his concentration. Shoto explained where the washroom was, and Izuku tried his best not to stare at the ornate decor surrounding him as he walked down the hall. There was no warmth in this home. Everything felt calculated and sterile. He turned the corner and ran headfirst into something, or someone, he corrected as he looked up to find a young man staring down at him. The bright blue eyes and striking white hair signaled that this was another Todoroki, perhaps the older brother Shoto mentioned. You're Azure's little brother, right? The man's eyes bored into him with curiosity, and Izuku's heart stuttered at the mention of his brother. Their brother. Izuku barely registered the question, but he quickly found his manners and replied, Yeah, I'm surprised you recognized me. It wasn't uncommon for him to be recognized, especially by those with connections to the hero industry. His family was filled with top heroes, and Dabi had solidified himself as a reliable and powerful hero. What are you doing here? The question wasn't accusatory, sounding more curious than anything. Izuku was surprised by the man's bluntness. Shoto and Fayumi seemed rigged in their manners, while this young man seemed to skirt those expectations. I'm visiting Shoto. We're studying for our upcoming exams. Izuku smiled politely, but his smile quickly fell. All of the casualness and curiosity had drained out of this new Todoroki's face, his expression adopting an iciness that reminded Izuku of Endeavor's old interviews. Do yourself a favor and stay away from him. He curses anyone he is involved with. The older Todoroki looked over Izuku's shoulder, his scowl deepening as his eyes pinpointed on something. Izuku turned to find Shoto standing behind them, his face more expressive than Izuku had ever seen it. Fayumi stepped into the hallway a moment later with a plate of apple slices, her eyes darting between the three of them with a concerned expression. Izuku stared at Shoto, trying to think of the best thing to say. His friend's expression turned icy, and he seemed to decide on something. Thank you for coming, Izuku. I think we should call it a day. Shoto turned and returned to the direction of the sitting room, and Izuku immediately followed. Natsuo, what did you do? Fayumi's voice carried down the hallway, but Izuku couldn't pay attention to that conversation. He had to make sure his friend was okay, even though he was sure that he was not. How could someone say such a thing about their own brother? He tried to imagine what he would do if he overheard Dabi speaking about him that way, but the thought was too upsetting to even entertain. Once he reached the sitting room, he saw Shoto cleaning up his textbooks. I don't mind staying. I was having a nice time. Izuku tried, but he felt the words weren't enough. He wasn't sure what would be enough. It's all right. I don't feel up to studying anymore. I apologize for ending our study session so abruptly. Shoto's words were careful and clipped, though he wasn't being cold towards Izuku. It was clear he was trying to control his emotions, masking them from the world as he dealt with his inner turmoil. Izuku packed up his things, not wanting to push too hard. Thank you for coming. I had a nice time. Shoto walked him to the door, his small smile piercing Izuku's heart with sadness. I did too. Next time you can come over to my house, if that works. He hoped his words weren't rude, but he wanted Shoto to know that his world was bigger than what was in these walls. His new friend paused for a moment, a genuine look of surprise crossing his face before he schooled his expression once again. I'd like that, thank you. The pair said their goodbyes and Izuku began to make his way towards the train station. His mind was filled with many conflicting thoughts regarding both the Todoroki family and his own. He barely caught the sound of footsteps catching up to him, and he turned in time to find an out-of-breath Shoto standing behind him. Before Izuku could speak, his friend reached out to grab his arm and began guiding him in the opposite direction of the station. I apologize, but I would like to tell you something. Izuku let himself be dragged a few blocks away, following along silently as Shoto directed them into a large park. It wasn't until they were sat on a bench overlooking a small pond that his friend finally let his arm go. My mother used to bring me here. Shoto seemed a bit embarrassed now that they had reached their destination, but his words were earnest. Izuku stayed silent, not wanting to cause the other boy to retreat back into his shell. Shoto stared at his hands in his lap, confliction evident on his features as he seemed to try to find what he wanted to say. May I tell you why my brother acted so coldly towards me? Izuku's breath hitched, his heart racing as he nodded, unsure of how this conversation would unfold. Shoto told him about his childhood, how his father yearned for the perfect heir that could defeat All Might, how his mother grew resentful, his siblings when ignored for so many years. He told Izuku about Tauya. I suppose my existence is truly cursed, since my oldest brother had to disappear to get away from me. Shoto wouldn't meet Izuku's eyes. Natsuo has always blamed me for Tauya's disappearance. Perhaps things would have been different if I were never born. They sat in silence for a long time, both of them wrestling with their thoughts and the gravity of their conversation. Shoto seemed to have more to say, and Izuku listened intently as he continued. Father has tried to be better in some ways, and he never stopped looking for Tauya. But there are more bad days than there are good. Izuku's jaw clenched, his mind flashing with memories of Dabi. Fayumi treats me as though I am made of glass, as though she is afraid I will leave too if she doesn't handle me carefully. Father projects his regrets and ambitions onto me. Shoto clenched his hands into fists, digging his nails into his palms as he looked up to stare at the pond's still waters. Natsuo hates me. The sorrow in his friend's voice broke Izuku's heart. He thought of how lonely it must have been, growing up in a house where everyone's expectations weighed on you constantly. Loneliness was something he could sympathize with, and he couldn't help but feel guilty that he was saved by his family before things got too bad. Izuku wanted to scream, to break and throw anything he could get his hands on, to burn everything to the ground. So many of his suspicions were confirmed, but he didn't feel any vindication in that fact. What could he say? How do you respond when someone rips open their heart to present to you? He couldn't let this moment pass without responding, but he had to be very careful with his words. Thank you for trusting me. I can't imagine what you have been going through all of this time. He paused, his next statement burning the back of his throat as he thought it over. I may not have known Tauya, liar, but I think he would be very proud of you. You've kept going all this time, and you haven't given up in the face of all this. Shoto turned to him quickly, his eyes wide and his mouth open in shock and uncertainty. Many people would turn cruel, but you have remained kind despite all that you have been through. Izuku reached out and clasped his friend's shoulder, desperately hoping he did not cross a line with his words. "Thank you for listening. I feel like a weight has been lifted off of my chest." Shoto smiled at him, and Izuku felt nauseous from the guilt of the secret he withheld from his friend. But it was not his secret to share, and he would never betray his brother's trust by revealing his past before he was ready. You have people who see you for you, not as a tool or a ghost from the past. We can always remind you whenever you need it. They sat together for a while, enjoying the breeze and the sounds of nature surrounding them. It had been a strange day, both of them reeling from the vulnerability that had been shared between them. Izuku's phone buzzed, and he unlocked it when he saw a missed call from Uncle Sho. The man sent him a text to check in, asking if he'd like to meet up before he went on his patrol for the night. He wondered if he should leave Shoto alone, but also knew that it was best to leave things for the day. They were both emotionally drained, and Fayumi would probably be worried sick if her brother did not return soon. The pair said their goodbyes, promising to see each other soon as Shoto dropped Izuku off at the station. He had a lot on his mind, but he wouldn't let anything take away from quality time with his uncle. Hitoshi had been worried about his father due to a difficult case he had been working on. As he stepped off the train, he saw the familiar form of his uncle leaning against a nearby wall, his capture scarf covering the bottom of his face as he scanned the crowd for his nephew. The happiness in his eyes was transparent when he saw Izuku, though it was clear he was trying to hide it. "Let's go pay Grandma Hazuki a visit. I'm sure she would love to see you." Sho stepped off the wall and gestured towards the entrance, foregoing all formal greeting. The pair walked side by side, the comfort of being with his uncle causing all of the stress from the day to drain from him. Sho would always be one of his first and most important confidants and mentors. He couldn't help but smile when he saw their adopted grandma sweeping the sidewalk outside of her restaurant. She grinned when she saw the pair approaching, and they both immediately opened their arms for her hugs. "Take a seat, I'll bring you a few plates out." She patted their heads as they slid into a booth, retreating to the kitchen to cook them up their favorite meals. Sho seemed lighter than he had when they had first met up, his posture more relaxed and open now that they were surrounded by comfort. Izuku allowed himself to unwind a bit, the pressure on his mind slowly dissipating. "What were you up to today?" Sho asked after they had settled in. "I went to Shoto's house for a bit. We were studying for our exams." He watched as his uncle tensed for a moment before trying to adopt a casual expression. "How did that go?" Izuku debated on what to say, how much of the truth he wanted to reveal. He was walking a tightrope and trying to balance the wishes of his brother and friend. His own anger towards the issue gnawed at him, though he tried his best to push that to the side. He decided to tell some of the truth, explaining what happened with Natsuo and the conversation he had with Shoto afterward. Though he did not reveal his suspicions that Taoya was his older brother, it seemed Sho had come to the conclusion on his own. Neither of them spoke it into existence, instead commenting on the strange dynamics of the Todoroki family and moving on to other topics. They wouldn't push Dabi, they couldn't, but Izuku couldn't help but remember his own inner turmoil. How he hid his anguish until he ended up on a rooftop alone and afraid. He refused to let his brother suffer alone, even if he had to wait for the man to open up completely. They caught up with Grandma Hazuki as they ate, and she brought them extra treats once they had finished their meals. "You boys look weary. Remember to rest every once in a while." She ruffled their hair, and Izuku giggled when his uncle huffed like an annoyed cat. The sun was setting, meaning that Sho would need to start his patrol soon. They were finishing the last of their dessert when they began to hear crashes and screams outside, their attention immediately drawn to whatever was causing the chaos. Sho threw money on the table as they waved goodbye to Hazuki, both of them immediately sprinting outside to see what was going on. A large shadow filled the end of the street, thrashing around as people ran away from flying cars and debris. A bird-like screech filled the area, causing the surrounding buildings to shake. "Stay here. If you need to evacuate, make sure you bring Hazuki with you." Sho pulled his goggles down, already making a move to run towards the scene. "Wait, I can help." Izuku stepped forward, desperate to fight side by side with his uncle. The man turned towards him, placing a hand on his shoulder as his mouth set into an apologetic smile. "You are absolutely amazing, but you are still a kid. Let the pros handle this one." He ruffled Izuku's hair and gave him one last look before darting down the street. Izuku stayed put, waving Grandma Hazuki's concerns off as she made her way out of the restaurant for the night. She told him to stay safe, asking that he call her later to confirm they both made it out all right. It only took a few minutes of standing alone to make him restless. There wasn't any reason he couldn't watch, right? He had observed countless hero fights in his life, even before he began training and learning how to keep himself out of trouble. There were enough buildings for him to perch on, ensuring that he avoided any danger. Izuku began to jog before he had fully made up his mind. Once he was 1 block away from the fight, he decided to climb one of the nearby fire escapes to situate himself on top of a building. His heart was pounding in his chest from adrenaline as he watched a bird-like shadow wreaking havoc down below. Sho and another hero Izuku wasn't familiar with were doing their best to get people out of the way. It was clear that erasure wasn't working on the villain's quirk, and it was likely that more heroes would be needed to contain the scene. He watched as the other hero tried to pull a woman out of harm's way, but she was hysterically crying and trying to run towards the shadow. "Please, help my baby, my poor baby," she sobbed, pointing at the shadow. Both heroes stiffened, and Izuku's mind began to piece together a horrible conclusion. "What are you doing up here, baby bird?" Izuku turned to find Keigo standing behind him, though the hero's eyes were concentrated on the scene below. "Thought it'd be safer up here," he replied meekly, though his brother thankfully ignored his omission of the truth. Keigo patted his hair fondly before adjusting himself for takeoff. "Stay up here." He watched as his brother soared down to the street level, circling the scene before landing next to Eraserhead. The two men debriefed, Keigo's eyes widening as Sho seemed to clue him in on the villain's true identity. The blonde stared up at the shadow with wide eyes and a pale expression. Izuku wondered how the heroes would handle the situation, his mind buzzing with plans that he tossed aside each time he reached a dead end. The hairs on the back of his neck began to tingle as the scent of fire filled the air. His heart jumped as he looked up to find the glowing form of Endeavor in the sky. He couldn't help the disgusted expression that formed on his face, his concern for the situation growing by the minute. The number 2 hero wasn't known for gentleness, a skill that this situation was in great need of. The flame hero landed and immediately demanded a report, scowling intently as he listened to Eraserhead explain what they had learned so far. Endeavor turned to stare up at the shadow, confidently approaching as the being seemed to shy away from him. Izuku watched the scene carefully, his eyes darting up to find the nearby streetlights decimated. Did it target the lights on purpose? His mind was racing as he watched Endeavor taunt the shadow with his flames, threatening the villain with imprisonment. Izuku realized that Keigo and Sho had forgotten to mention their theory, and their omission would only cause the incident to worsen. He tried to concentrate, theories and ideas popping up in his mind as he took in the facts. Keigo looked up and locked eyes with Izuku, and the younger boy took this moment to sign his theory to his brother. "Light." The blonde nodded in understanding, a proud smile forming on his face as he began barking out a plan to the surrounding heroes. Endeavor turned to them with a frown, clearly annoyed at the orders being directed his way. "I am the highest-ranking hero here, and therefore have control over the scene and the capture of this villain." The man puffed his chest out, clearly trying to intimidate the heroes into listening to him. "High-ranking or not, I will never allow you to harm this poor child." Eraserhead practically growled. Izuku expected Endeavor to fight back, but the man froze in his place. His flames dimmed for a moment as he seemed to process what Sho had said. "A child," is practically whispered, and Izuku had to read his lips to understand what he had said. Keigo and Sho were clearly taken aback by the man's reaction, but they immediately shifted back into hero mode. Endeavor began to dampen his flames as he listened in on the plan, causing the shadow to begin to rage once again. Keigo seemed to explain Izuku's theory, all of them nodding in agreement on their plan before jumping into action. The flame hero shot into the sky, his body glowing as he circled the being in the air. The shadow began to screech, distracting it enough for Keigo to get close. He dodged in and out, disorienting the beast as it tried to shy away from the flames shining down on it. The two heroes edged closer and closer, slowly causing the shadow to shrink until it completely disappeared. Izuku gasped when he saw the collapsed body of a child on the ground. The boy had the head of a bird, his features vaguely similar to the beast that had caused the destruction. He seemed uninjured, but Sho immediately jumped in to check him over for anything serious. He confirmed that the boy was breathing, and the sound of sirens could already be heard in the distance. The boy was okay, the destruction had been halted, and it seemed that the heroes had come out unscathed. Izuku decided it was time for him to make his way back down to the street, but it seemed that the building had other plans. As soon as he stood from his perch, he began to hear creaking and crunching, the roof shaking under his feet as he tried to figure out a way out of the situation. "Zuku!" Keigo shouted, already launching himself into the air as he watched the building begin to crumble underneath the boy's feet. He was too far away. The ground underneath Izuku's feet crumbled away. His eyes locked onto the horrified expression of his brother as the world spinned around him. Images of his family flashed through his mind, and he desperately looked around him to find something to grab onto. As soon as he began to panic, a strong pair of arms wrapped around him and deposited him onto the ground. "What were you doing up there, kid?" He turned to find Endeavor staring down at him with disapproval. Izuku's entire body froze, his eyes widening as he tried to force his mouth to move. The hero's eyes seemed cold and distant, though they seemed to shine with recognition after a few moments. Endeavor awkwardly uncrossed his arms and relaxed a bit, his efforts to act less intimidating somewhat helping Izuku's nerves. "You are Shoto's friend, correct?" The man seemed so different from the confident hero he was just a moment before. Izuku felt a conflicting mixture of emotions. his adrenaline still running high from his near-death experience. He nodded in confirmation. Before they could continue their stinted conversation, Sho and Keigo had him wrapped up in a dual bear hug that pushed all of the air out of his lungs. The two men began fretting over him, though Izuku's attention was on the retreating form of the number 2 hero. "Did he say anything to you? Hurt you in any way?" Keigo looked him over, his scrutinizing gaze searching for any burns or unexplained bruises. Izuku shook his head, his voice numb as a wave of exhaustion overtook him. He asked if I was Shoto's friend. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.